Americans mean what they say, speak plainly, and keep their promises. Imagine that what happened when she realized that we are immersed in a deliberately deceptive world of double meanings, legal chicanery, and outright fraud being carried out by foreign governmental services corporations against the same Americans. That revelation started back in the 1970s when she happened to hear the confirmation hearing of Nelson D. Rockefeller as Europol's vice president, and learned that Nelson, despite having hundreds of millions in income, paid no federal income tax at all. I say, what? The rest of her story has been one long road trip on the road to find out exactly why Nelson D. Rockefeller didn't pay federal income tax that she was expected to, and why there are multiple states of states, organizations, and why her public employees seem to have a bad attitude. And all that, of course, led eventually to the history underlying all these symptoms of corruption and exposure of the jurisdictions that are involved. She comes to share this knowledge garnered over the course of more than 40 years, news of current events to clean up what she calls mess exploitation. She wants to make the acquaintance of like-minded Americans. The drive is on to restore all the land jurisdiction states by November 2018.
I hope the mic works better for her than it worked for you, and...
Turn it up.
We got a separate mic for her.
Okay, because we couldn't hear Ed.
Was that not loud enough back there?
That's right.
They're putting another mic. Yeah, I don't think it was. Not working. They need to.
Okay, or you could just lay it on there.
That's the mic. Oh, yeah.
Okay, that one worked. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for letting me come visit you. We have a little retirement home up in Lampasas, so a couple, 2-3 times a year I'm here in Texas. And this is my first time ever to come in the spring. So I'm enjoying this beautiful springtime very much and enjoying the wildflowers. I am making the rounds as much as I can to talk to different state organizations and in your case, Republic. We are in the process of reforming the national government. Now that sounds kind of strange because we all assume that we have a national government, but in fact what we have is a territorial government. The national government of this country was mothballed following the Civil War, and the original states were replaced by territorial states. And this is something that we have discovered in the process of researching the history of this country and of each state. They came in after the Civil War and they forced all of the states that were then organized to adopt a new constitution. And at the time, people didn't understand what all this was about. And in most cases, the new Constitution was very similar to the old Constitution, so it didn't seem like anything worth arguing over. However, what had happened is that the original state of Florida, for example, or the original state of Georgia, was being replaced by a territorial state of Florida, or a territorial state of Georgia. And these states of states appeared to be the same. They were operating under what appeared to be the same name, right? So using this deception, which is called a conversion, they converted the national states into territorial states. And at the same time, they took all of the property that was naturally being controlled by and owned by those national states and rolled them into trusts, state land trusts. So the original state of Texas was rolled into the Texas State Land Trust. And the original state of Georgia was rolled into the Georgia State Land Trust. And they did this all over this country. Now, I have to go back and check, but I believe, if memory serves me right, that there were 37 actual original national level states enrolled at the time of the Civil War. And all of the rest of the states that were not states at the time of the Civil War are still in a quasi-state status. They are what I call states in waiting. They have corporate contracts to be treated as states. They have guarantees that say that they have all the same rights and prerogatives as all the other states. But in fact, they were never enrolled as states at the national level because we haven't had a national Congress to enroll them since 1860. Now this is a real concern because all of those states like Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, all the western states that we normally think of other than Texas and California are not really states. They don't have the standing in the world internationally that they should have. And they're still being administered by the federal government, which is the territorial and municipal levels of the government, which is what happened out in Oregon with all those people taking over the wildlife refuge and the problems that the Hammond ranchers had. They're in a situation where the federal agencies and the federal bureaucracy of the territorial and municipal levels of the national government are supposed to be in a proprietary caretaking capacity, and instead they've taken over. And so the drive is on to bring back the national states, the national level states. That doesn't mean we're replacing the territorial states. It means that we're creating the national level of our government. And in order to do that, we have to be functioning in our full capacity as land jurisdiction people. And that's another thing. You have all noticed, I am sure, that something seems to be very wrong with the way our country is being operated. It's almost like it's upside down. If you're like we were in Wisconsin, you were taught as a child that the government proceeded from the people, right? The people delegated power to the counties delegated power to the states, and then the states delegated power by the constitutions to the federal government, right? But instead, it seems like the federal government employees are coming in and telling us what to do and treating us very badly in the process. So something's wrong. And as the little story about me becoming aware back in the early 70s or 80s, whenever it was, that Nelson Rockefeller didn't pay any taxes. I mean, how many incidents does it take like this before we realize something's rotten in Denmark or, you know, Poughkeepsie? I mean, this is not a good thing. So this is where the trail has led. The realization that our national government was mothballed 150 years ago, and we have been operating as a territorial government ever since. Now, the territorial government is one of three levels of the federal government. And I want to go over this because this is not all that well understood either. We start out with all of the power being vested in the people. Then we go to the county level. And in the land jurisdiction, which we are all part of, the land jurisdiction government of the county is vested in a jural assembly. Not a jural society, a jural assembly. So we start out and we organize our government as a jural assembly at the county level. Then the counties get together and they organize their government via a state assembly process at the state level. And then finally we have a Congress of the states. And that's the national level. There is another possibility for us. We can also have what's called Continental Congress. And that's where we started out this entire country, was with a Continental Congress. And this is something people need to understand. There are different layers of our government that we've never been taught about. Let's go back to when the colonies got started. A colony is a farm family assembly. So these were groups of farm families that were organized as a colony. Those colonies gave rise to the states. And those are all soil jurisdiction. We don't talk about soil jurisdiction, but that's the fundamental jurisdiction, the highest level of jurisdiction and sovereignty that we have. And then, after the soil jurisdiction, we have the land jurisdiction. And that's what we most typically talk about. Land jurisdiction is international. Soil jurisdiction is national. Land jurisdiction is international. So when we came to wake up again and realize what was going on, we realized that we still had the land jurisdiction in our control, that the soil jurisdiction wasn't operating, and that the national level state of states were not operating. And that basically this entire country was being run by the territorial level government. Now, what is the territorial level government? When you look at the Constitution, all constitutions, by definition, are debt agreements. They basically spell out who's going to provide what services and who's going to organize the delivery of those services and who's going to pay for what. And when you look at this, you will see that there were actually 3 federal level constitutions. We're never taught about that either. The national level constitution was called the Constitution for the United States of America. And you have copies of that document in several different public libraries here in Texas. So it has the word for in it, not of. And there is a difference in the way the United States of America is styled. It has a small u on the United, a capital S on states, a small o on of, and a large A on A, America, okay, States of America. So that contract was actually between the United States of America, unincorporated, and the service provider, States of America. Now this is where the big confusion over the Articles of Confederation comes in too. People say that the Articles of Confederation were rolled into the Constitution somehow. They think that the Articles of Confederation disappeared. But there's absolutely no record of them ever being repealed. And in order to be repealed, it has to be repealed, right? So that tells you right there, a lot of this history is history that we know because of what isn't there. And we know that the Articles of Confederation were never repealed by anybody. So the Articles of Confederation still stand, but what were they? Well, they were a second union of states. The first union of states was created September 9th, 1776, when they created the United States of America unincorporated. The second union of states, the Confederation, was created in 1781, and that was called the States of America. So you had two unions operating in two different capacities. One that was operating at the international level, one that was operating at the national level. And during the Civil War, the national level union was dismembered and torn apart and was never reformed. So even though it was never repealed, it simply got mothballed, usurped upon, shoved aside, substituted by the territorial government. Yeah, I know, that's shocking, but that's actually what went on. And now we're in the process of correcting that. So when we're talking about the state of Michigan getting organized, we're not talking about any state of Michigan you've ever known of in your lifetime. We're talking about a national level, land jurisdiction, state of Michigan. And we now have 30 states reporting. 30 out of the 37 we need. And all of this is coming to a head, folks, because both the territorial and the municipal levels of the government are bankrupt. Now, I had some questions here, and I promised I would answer about this. We had 3 states where I was getting these calls all of a sudden, help, help. You know, I just got this notice in the mail, a $120,000 tax bill on my property that I have to pay in 30 days or I'm going to be evicted. You know, I thought I paid all of my taxes. I was clear for the year. And suddenly I have this gigantic tax bill that I have to pay. And this was happening in 3 different states. And we delved into it and we figured out that this was the result of the municipal government going bankrupt. They are holding all of our property as surety for their debts. They've basically pulled a fast one. They've stolen our identity. They have laid claim to us, basically told the lie that we were all trust properties, that we were all wards of the state. And they have then created trusts accordingly. Now I've got a little diagram on my website and it shows where our trade name, which is the name that you're all familiar with, upper, lower case, first, middle, last, that you grew up with using in grade school. Right, she has a copy of it back there. It shows you that the trade name is missing. Well, how could it be that your trade name is missing? Well, it's missing from the public record. It's missing from the land jurisdiction record because your parents never knew that they had to record it. And what happened was this territorial corporation that is here under the provisions of Article 4 of the Constitution to provide essential governmental services came in and claimed your name as that of a trust property, a ward of the state. They copyrighted your name, and that copyright is being held by the British Crown Corporation. So your name is property that they used to accumulate debt against. It's called hypothecation of debt. And so they have run up your credit, just like any credit card snatcher, and left you to pay their bills. And now they're bankrupt. So their secondary creditors are coming after Americans under all these false presumptions. And those gigantic property tax bills, that was secondary creditors coming in and operating under the guise of U.S. trustees to assess all of this extra property tax against anybody's name that they had on the tax rolls. And we had to go in and operate the international level of the existing government, which is the United States of America unincorporated. We had to go in and protest, object, bring suit, and shut down those kinds of claims. And if we hadn't done that, everybody in America by now would be getting these gigantic tax bills. Now they're trying to phase it in and get their way anyway by beginning a more gradual approach. And so one of the gentlemen here showed me today an announcement that their property taxes are going up by 49% over 5 years. And this has all basically been foisted off on people by fraud, by false claims in commerce. And it's a very serious situation. It's something that we're dealing with as best we can, but it's going to require a lot of action by a lot of people to band together and say no to this and bring forward the kinds of actions that are necessary. And you know, I'm looking around here and there's been a lot of discussion about the need for younger people to get involved. Well, I'll tell you what, the younger people need to get involved because they're the ones that are going to bear the brunt of this. So, but that's all the bad news, and that's the motivation. Okay, this is why it's urgent that everybody get clued in and start taking action in their own behalf, but it's also why we need to get active and take action in behalf of our counties and our states. Because if we don't, the secondary creditors of those bankruptcies are going to come in here and they're going to own everything and we're going to own nothing. And they even had it set up so that they had their commercial mercenary armies already set up here, ready to go. So I'm sure some of you have seen articles on the web where, you know, the FEMA had invested millions of body bags and billions of rounds of ammunition. They were going to use these agencies as basically mercenary armies on our soil to come evict us from our homes and businesses and resettle us, just like the British government did in Ireland in the 1850s. They thought they were going to get away with this. And they almost did. You know, if we hadn't been awake and hadn't raised our hands and said, uh-oh, no. If we hadn't given civil orders to the Joint Chiefs of Staff back in 2014, they would have gotten away with this. So we're dealing with some very disreputable, very criminal elements that have been hijacking our government for 150 years. And this is all the bad news. I do have good news. First and foremost, the good news is that we have been able to stop them. We have been able to operate the United States of America unincorporated is still standing. It is still populated. We are still here and we are still holding our ground. We're still objecting to all this. We've still brought forward all of the court battles. We have court cases in 6 major courts worldwide. We have gone to Rome, we have pressed our claims, we have done everything necessary to make sure that nothing bad happens to the American people. But I just felt like you all needed to know this is a very serious situation we're in, and we need to really pay attention. And when you get these gigantic tax bills, you'll know what the presumptions are that they're using to assess you 49% more over a course of 5 years. Or they're sending you a suddenly out of the blue a gigantic tax bill for, you know, $20, $30, $40, $100,000 that you're supposed to just pull out of your pocket and hand over to them. It's the secondary creditors of these bankrupt federal corporations. Now, what can you do for your own families? All right, this goes to the heart of the concept of capacity. Now, we all work in different capacities. You might be here today as a member of this Republic Congress, right? That's a capacity. It's an office or a job that you do. You might also have a capacity as a grandma, as I do. You might have a capacity as a waitress at a charity function. Well, we all have different capacities, and so we all have different persons. Your trade name that your parents gave you when you were born is a capacity. That's your trade name that you use in public when you're standing on the land jurisdiction of the state where you were born. Unfortunately, there's a little oddball thing in the law that also makes it the name of a foreign situs trust when you're operating in the international jurisdiction of the sea. And back in 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt pulled off the heist of heists, the biggest crime in history, when he presumed upon the American people to declare that your trade names were actually the names of foreign situs trusts in the international jurisdiction of the sea. He removed all of our trade names to international jurisdiction with the stroke of a pen, which is known as an unlawful conversion. And if you go back and look at the complaint that was filed by Congressman Louis T. McFadden, who was co-chair of the House Banking Committee at that time, you'll see that he characterized it as unlawful conversion. So suddenly, instead of operating on the land and with all of the guarantees that you are owed as Americans, you are suddenly in the international jurisdiction of the sea, and you are being treated as territorial citizens. Now, the word citizen is a tricky word. Citizen implies that you are under obligation to the government, as in obligation to serve the government. All right? So when you say you're a citizen of Texas, you're saying, I have an obligation to Texas to serve the government of Texas. And when you say I'm a citizen of the United States, I'm under obligation to obey the laws and serve the interests and serve the duties of the United States. But we don't know what United States they're talking about. And they just kind of shimmy-shafted around on that too. We think of the United States as America, the 50 states, right? Well, some of you were watching when President Obama referred to the 57 states. And everybody was laughing and saying, well, doesn't he know that there's only 50 states? Well, you see, he wasn't talking about our states. He wasn't talking about the national states, the ones that are mothballed. He was talking about the territorial states, and there are 57 territorial states. And we're all familiar with those territorial states. You've seen territorial states all your lives. Those are the ones that are using the upper lowercase state of Washington, state of Florida, state of Georgia. That's a territorial state. You've also seen municipal states of states. And those are the ones that are using the all capital names. State of Washington, state of Idaho, state of Ohio. Those are all municipal state of states. So he was talking about the territorial state of states. He wasn't talking about our states. Why would he be talking about our states? Our states have been mothballed since 1860. He's running a completely different government than what we think he's running. Or he was, I should say. Thank God. So what we think of as the federal government is actually two different entities, a territorial government and a municipal government, with no national government on the board. That's why when you look out and you are listening to international news, you'll hear people like Karen Hood saying that our government is in abeyance, in an abeyance. It's being held aside as it might come back at some point in the future, but it isn't here now. That's what they're saying. Our national government has been in abeyance. It's been mothballed for decades. I know. I can see some of you are looking at me and you're going, oh my, is this even real? Can this be possible? But yes, this is possible, and in fact, this is what's going on. And that's what we're fighting with every day. That's what I'm contesting with every day, is that we need to bring our national government back into full operation. And the reason that we need to bring our government back into full operation right now is that if we don't, there will be no government here except U.S. bankruptcy trustees acting in behalf of the secondary creditors, the international banks. And we've been able to throw together a government, a level of government, and administrate it from the highest possible position. But in order to make that work, to make it true, to make it right, we have to have the people come back to the land jurisdiction and actually take charge of their own business, operate their own government, as you folks are doing here today. Because the ultimate responsibility of Americans is self-governance. And we've kind of gotten into the habit of letting George do it and letting all of these foreign federal service providers do everything for us. And as they've been doing everything for us, they've also been stealing us blind. Now the Constitution, I started out by saying there were 3 constitutions. Well, the missing Constitution, the national Constitution, is the one that has the word "for" in it. The territorial Constitution is the one that we're all familiar with. And in 1868, they took that original Constitution, which is called the Constitution of the United States of America, and they converted it from an unincorporated body to a corporation. So in 1868, they announced a new Constitution, and it was called the same thing, the Constitution of the United States of America, and it didn't seem to be at all different, but it was. It had changed its nature. It was no longer a constitution that was an international treaty. They were now using an incorporated constitution that was actually the Articles of Incorporation. So the government went from being unincorporated to being incorporated. So that happened in 1868 with the territorial government. Then there's a third constitution that's called simply the Constitution of the United States. That's the municipal constitution. Now, those of you who have read the Constitution a lot know that Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 allows the Congress to provide a government for the city of Washington, D.C., for the district. So they have the right to run a plenary oligarchy as a city-state, an international city-state, and that's what they've done. Now, as incredible as this may seem, they created that, they incorporated it, and they have run all of these state-of organizations as municipal states on our land. So, for example, the state of Idaho, all capitals, that's a municipal state-of-state organization. And it's an oligarchy, completely subject to every whim of Congress. So now you begin to see, if you're a citizen of the state of Idaho, all caps, you're in a different jurisdiction than if you're a citizen of the state of Idaho, upper lowercase. And all of this gets very, very confusing. And it's confusing for the members of the government and for those who have been providing governmental services. It's as confusing for them as it is for us. I can't count how many conversations I've had with law enforcement and with lawyers who are just as confused as anybody else about this. So our entire country is in a state of confusion, almost chaos, because nobody knows who's on first. It's like that old joke, who's on first, you know? Who or what is on first? And in order to make any sanity of this, we all have to gain control of, first and foremost, our own stuff, our own names, our own property, and then move on, just as you are doing here, to regain control of your local county and state governments. Now, when we talk about republics, you'll see in the Constitution we are guaranteed a republican form of government. That is the guarantee for your county government. Your county government is your jural assembly level government. That's a republican. That is the female form of Latin. That means soil jurisdiction. Okay? Now, when you say the republic, and we all have republic states that we're owed, that's the male form of the Latin. That's the international jurisdiction of the land. Soil and land go together like mom and dad, right? Your soil jurisdiction and your land jurisdiction make up one continental jurisdiction. We never gave up one iota of any part of our land jurisdiction. So when you say you're standing on the land and soil of Michigan or Texas, that means something. That's a clear message to anybody that is standing in maritime jurisdiction or municipal jurisdiction or any of the delegated jurisdiction of the sea that, hey, I'm not in your jurisdiction. I don't owe it to you. I'm over here in Spain and you're in Germany. That's how big a distinction there is between the two. They are literally foreign with respect to us. They are here to provide governmental services. And if you look at Article 4 of any constitution, whether you look at the original national level constitution or the territorial or the municipal constitutions, you're going to see the same thing. Article 4 is going to say, here to provide essential governmental services. The reason they're here to provide essential governmental services goes all the way back to the Revolutionary War and to the peace treaty that ended the Revolutionary War. When we were coming out of 8 years of war with the British Empire, we had a giant merchant fleet and no navy. And the Napoleonic Wars and the French Revolution and everything else was booting up at the same time. Remember that. The British were at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. They needed our American raw products, our lumber, our cotton. They needed all of that for their factories. And we needed to sell all of our produce and all of our products also, right? We needed somewhere where we could sell our goods. So we needed their market. We needed their navy to protect our merchant fleet. And both countries needed to do business with each other. So the Founding Fathers struck a deal. And that deal is encapsulated in the Constitution. Basically, they ought to provide 19 enumerated services. Those are called delegated powers. So those 19 delegated powers include control over commerce. The British government has had control over our commerce and over our trade policies since the founding of the country. They've also owed us duty. They owe every single one of us duty as our trustees on the high seas and navigable inland waterways. Okay? The way they've gotten around that duty and not paid that duty is by redefining us, one by one, as territorial citizens. Territorial and municipal citizens have no constitutional rights. They never have had. Not since the foundations of the country. So when they convert your status from being an American national standing on the state of Texas to being a foreign situs trust operating in the international jurisdiction of the sea, and they say that you're a citizen, that means that you have no constitutional guarantees. That's why when you go into U.S. District Court and you raise a constitutional argument, they'll look you right in the face and say, that has nothing to do with anything here. If you mention it again, I'll hold you in contempt of court. That's because you have no guarantees. You have no guarantees at all. You have no constitutional rights as a territorial citizen or as a municipal citizen. And how do you know which one you are being addressed as? Well, it's the same style. The territorial states of states operate in upper lower case, state of Washington. And when they use your name in upper and lower case, they're addressing a territorial citizen. When they address you using the all caps name, they're addressing a municipal citizen. And the important take-home message for everybody in this room is that when you mean to be operating as an American, as a Texan, you're not a citizen of either one of those jurisdictions at all. You are not a citizen with respect to them. So you don't want to let them say that you're a citizen. You walk into a U.S. District Court, you're not a citizen. You're a non-citizen. Non-citizen national, 100%, sir. Only federal employees, meaning civil employees, military employees, federal dependents, which, you know, that can mean a wide range of things, but dependent on the federal government, African Americans, because African Americans were never given state citizenship following the Civil War because there were no states to take action on it. So they have only federal citizenship. And they don't have any choice. All they can do is claim equal civil rights until we can get a Continental Congress established, and just as with the Western states, resolve that unfinished business of making African Americans full Americans. Until then, they're in this quasi-weird world of being territorial citizens. But anyway, if you're just Joe Average and you're standing on the soil of Texas, that's a whole different bailiwick than if you were out on the ocean as a British territorial citizen. And the same thing applies with all the taxes. You know, there's a lot of discussion about federal income taxes. Well, who owes federal income tax? Federal citizens. That could be municipal citizens, it could be territorial citizens, it could even, under the diversity clause of the federal code, be a federally chartered corporation. And yes, indeed, that's how they get their hooks into you to pay federal income taxes. When your name went missing from the land jurisdiction records, the recording office, now remember, each and every single one of you is a land asset. Why are you a land asset? From dust thou comest, and to dust thou returnest. You are a land asset. You belong to the land. But there's no record of your name on the land. Your parents didn't go down to the recording office and say that at such and such date, such and such baby was born to such and such living at blah blah. So there's no record of you on the land jurisdiction. So even though you're a land asset, there's no record of you. It's like you were never born, as far as the public record goes. That's why your trade name is missing on that diagram, which I'm sure you will share with everyone. And in order to correct this whole bailiwick, to get everything back in order, you have to get your name recorded. You have to lay claim to your own name, your own trade name.
How do you do that?
I have the forms all ready to go, and they're published on my website. It's taken us years of labor to figure this all out and to get the right forms and to figure out how to record them correctly. But it's now doable, and it's not that costly or that difficult. It's just something that everybody needs to do if they intend to operate in the capacity that you're operating here today as Texans or Wisconsinites, or to actually be standing on the land jurisdiction of this country. And the more of us who do this, the more of us who come home, then we can begin the process of resuscitating the government that we are owed. Because make no mistake, the actual Constitution, in addition to be a dead instrument, it is a trilateral international treaty. It binds all of the states together, and it binds the federal government to each one of the states, and it binds the states in total to the federal government. So that to the extent that this all has to be present and working for it to function properly, we've been firing on 2 cylinders since 1860. Now, we've been functioning, but we haven't been functioning properly, and we haven't been functioning well, and certainly it has come at a great cost to the people. Now, when they come in there and they say that you owe a federal income tax, well, who or what owes that federal income tax? The very word income is a corporate accrual. And you're not functioning as a corporation, right? Now, we're all familiar with corporations that are named after people, like J.C. Penney or Sears and Roebuck, or Elizabeth Arden, or Chanel, named after Coco Chanel, right? So you can name a corporation after a person, and that's what they've done. In fact, they have named 3 primary corporations after you. They've taken your first and last name. So, for example, if your name was Joe Schmo, they've created a Joe Schmo Public Trust. Then they've created a Joe Michael Schmo, which is an individual trust estate. And finally, they've created a Joe M. Schmo public transmitting utility. They've named all of these different corporate things after you, and they use those different corporations to make investments, to carry out contracts of all kinds. Every single one of us in this room has hundreds, if not thousands, of accounts that are attached to our names. Investment accounts, stock accounts, pension accounts, you name it. Labor and construction contracts. It boggles the brain what's attached to each and every one of our names on an international level, worldwide. We went digging into some of these, and at the time that we first looked, my husband had 716 different construction accounts alone that were being operated under his name. When we looked up, my father's been dead since 1981. He was paying off 9 house mortgages for people we never heard of. I mean, some of this stuff is just, it's beyond belief. It's you know, you look at it and you just can't hardly imagine what's going on out there. And it's all been funneled by the territorial government investing and reinvesting our trust funds, because these are trust funds and tax shelters. And it's all operated out of the Trademark and Patent Office and the Copyright Office, which again the British Crown has operated in our behalf. They've basically been strangling and using us in our own behalf. Our servants have been running wild. And we've allowed it because we haven't known. We've never been told. We've been very carefully not told. We've been very carefully confused, and we have been deceived by similar word deceits like you're seeing now, like the 3 constitutions, like the 2 different kinds of states. Whoever taught you any of this? Whoever said anything like this in your entire life? You never heard it in grade school. And I wouldn't know it if I hadn't dug it up myself, and with my team of researchers and other people that have been concerned about this over the years. So the very first step is to regain control of your trade name. Once you gain control of your trade name and reconvey your trade name from the land, from the sea back to the land, that's step 1. Get your name recorded on the land jurisdiction. And I have the forms and the way to do that on my website, which is www.Anna, A-N-N-A, Von, V-O-N, Reitz, R-E-I-T-Z.com. And it's down toward the bottom of the list. It's an article that says editable PDFs forms. And you basically fill out these forms and record them with the land recording office. And what you're going to be doing is you're going to be executing a deed of reconveyance Just like when you reconvey a piece of property after it's had a mortgage on it, you're going to be establishing a deed of reconveyance, reconveying your name, your regular trade name that you've used all your life, upper lowercase, back to the land and soil of the state where you were born. That's job one. Once you're standing back on the land and your name has been recorded on the land jurisdiction, you have standing as an American that you assume that you've had all your life. And now you're ready to take control of all of these public trusts and public transmitting utilities that they've spun off of your name. So the next step is to seize control of those all capital letters names. Some people call them straw men. You're going to seize control of those by issuing a certificate of assumed name. And all those forms are there on the website too. And they're in an editable form so that you can clearly see where you need to fill in your information. We made it as simple as we could. Now when you're done with this, you're going to have your name back on the land jurisdiction. You're going to have control of your public trust, your public transmitting utility, and your estate. Now we're in court right now battling with the banks, basically. The banks are the no-goodniks at the bottom of all of this. And mostly it's the Bank of England and Bank of Scotland. No surprises there. What we're trying to do is get all American estates set aside out of the bankruptcy because of the fraud that's been practiced against this entire country. And so far it's looking pretty good. But there's no harm, and there's certainly a great deal of insurance value and benefit in getting your own name dragged out of the bankruptcy slush pile and asserting your own rights as an American on the land. Right now I'm standing here, I'm a free woman. I'm Teflon. I'm like Bill and Hillary. Bill and Hillary did this process when they were in law school. So that should tell you all something. It's worth doing. And it's a wonderful feeling to get up in the morning and not feel terrorized by your own government. I used to get up in the morning and feel terrorized by my own government. I used to have nightmares about the IRS. That was a real problem for me because, number one, it was all so complex and I couldn't be absolutely sure that I wasn't 10 cents off, right? Did I remember everything? And I also never liked the idea of signing up and saying that I am under penalty of perjury that I was a withholding agent when nobody ever told me what a withholding agent was. Well, it turns out after a great deal of research in foreign archives, we found out that a withholding agent, in the case of the IRS forms, is swearing under penalty of perjury that you are a warrant officer in the British Merchant Marine Service. And I knew right there and then that I was not going to sign a 1040 ever again in my life because I would be telling a barefaced lie. And I would be subjecting myself to a 2-year stint in the federal prison for signing that paper. So I haven't filed a federal tax form since 1998. And I have no reason to because I'm not a federal employee. So, people ask me all the time about the IRS. Well, they are presuming that you are operating as a corporation, as a federally chartered corporation, Because so far as the public record shows, the only thing with your name on it out there is in international jurisdiction of the sea. So you'll notice that when you get, like when they send out these tax forms and it has pre-printed with your name on it, it's always in capital letters. It's always one of those three names that are in capital letters. They're always either trying to tax a public trust, a public estate, or a public transmitting utility. And you're none of the above. In fact, you never knew that these things were being operated in your name. So do you owe any tax? No. Are you a withholding agent? No. No, you're not. And one of the best arguments I ever heard for accusations of non-filing, you know, they always send out these complaints and they say, oh, you're not filing. One of the best answers to failure to file is, oh, I found out what a withholding agent is, and I'm not one. I will swear on a stack of Bibles that I am not a warrant officer in the British Merchant Marines. I will guarantee that. And by the way, trying to force me to file anything that said I was under penalty of perjury would be an inducement to criminal activity. So that just shuts down all these failure to file ideas right there. I'm not in the British Merchant Marines, I'm sorry. You must have someone else in mind. Oh, could you be talking about this corporation that I also have control of? See my certificate of assumed name? Now, just remember what I said about Congressman Louis T. McFadden and his complaint before the House Banking Committee and before the House Judiciary Committee, which still hasn't been acted on since 1934, by the way. He called it unlawful conversion. So what I'm encouraging all of you to do is a lawful conversion. Each one of us individually can take back what they stole from us. We can take back our good name. And when we're talking about the good name, we're talking about the trade name. The trade name is your Christian name. So if you're a Christian, this is also a religious issue. You're taking back your Christian name. I went to court and did an adult name change. I went from being Anna Maria Reisinger, all capital letters, to being Anna Maria Reisinger, upper lower case. And when the judge came around, he looked at this kind of sideways and he says, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm taking back my Christian name." And that was it. That was the end of the entire argument. Boom, right there. You don't need any other excuse for taking back your name to upper lower case. Now, if you want to go and do that and do an adult name change, you can do that. In most places it's anywhere from $150 to $300 and, you know, something like 6 weeks of process time to do that. I did that because I knew that I was going to be in some intense court battles and I was going to be facing a lot of flack. I think that for Joe Average, who's not going to be in the center of a fight, that the deed of reconveyance that we provide on my website is more than sufficient to make your claim. I don't think everybody can or should have the extra burden of going through an actual court process. But the reason I did it, I wanted something in my hand that proved that they had moved that name back to me, that I had it in my possession, that it was not in any trust or caretaking capacity of the state of, in my case, Alaska. I was stealing back my own trade name, and then I reconveyed it. So that is a closed loop. I got the court order making the change back to the Christian name, upper lowercase. I went and recorded my deed of reconveyance, my acknowledgement, my acceptance, and my deed of reconveyance to the land and soil of Wisconsin, where I was born, with the Alaska Land Recording Office. Then I went back to the court with a certified copy of my recording and put it in the case file. So I got the court to officially change the name back to the upper lowercase. I recorded that, reconveyed it to the land and soil. Then I took a certified copy back to the court and had them put it in the name change file so that they were fully and duly noticed. There's absolutely no way that they can claim that they have any more attachment to my name or that they were not given due notice. And that's what I call closing the circle. Wrapping it all up so everybody has due notice. So depending on your situation and how much property you have, I mean, if you're a multimillionaire and you've got, you know, a gazillion acres of property, or you've got businesses that you own, you might want to go get an actual name change back to your upper lowercase name. Otherwise, if you're an average person and you're just living your life and want to be left alone, do the reconveyance and let it be good enough, because that will be good enough for most purposes. I'm describing my process and what I went through and why I went through it for you, so that you know that that option is out there, depending upon your own situation. So, what to do with all of these tax things? Now, these guys here have developed a wonderful option for you guys to consider in dealing with the IRS. I simply revoked my election to pay. When you first sign a 1040 for the first time, you are signing what's called a novation contract. That's never told to you, and it's very sneakily added to the paperwork. But basically, a novation contract is a contract that is self-perpetuating. If you file it once, there's a presumption that you're going to file the next year, and the next year, and the next year. Let me give you kind of a brief history of the IRS. The IRS, the first income tax ever recorded was in the early 1100s in France and England, and it was called Peter's Pence. And it was a tax levied by the Catholic Church to pay for the costs of the Crusades. And it was collected on the 15th of April every year by members of the Dominican order who wore black robes and were members of the Inquisition. Not much has changed, huh?
What year did they start doing that?
1135 AD. And it remains a voluntary tax. You've probably heard or seen clips where some IRS official will be standing there blinking their eyes and looking confused and saying, but this is a voluntary tax. We're going to take 45% of your earned income, and it's all voluntary. Right? Right. Well, technically it is voluntary. It's just that it was never fully disclosed to you, and you didn't know that you had a choice, and you didn't know how to exercise that choice, and nobody told you, and that's for darn sure. You have the right to revoke your election to pay the income tax. if you are Joe Average and are not a federal employee or federal dependent. Now, I don't know right off the top of my head what the citation in the IRS code is, but you don't even have to recite that. What you need to do is send a letter to both the Commissioner of the IRS and the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service. There are two. Again, we're dealing with duplicitous names. I mean, who would think that the Commissioner of IRS was different than the Commissioner of Internal Revenue Service? But there are two separate offices, and you have to notify both of your revocation of election to pay federal income taxes. Most of us have never been subject to federal income taxes. And most of us were subscribed under provisions that happened after World War II. My mother, who just recently died at age 96, remembered when all of this went down. It was during the war, the Second World War, and Congress came up with the victory tax. It was called the victory tax. And patriotic Americans could voluntarily sign up to pay a portion of their wages, the same as federal employees, for the war effort. And this was done during the war, so there was not a specific end date attached to the program, the victory tax program. It just said at the end of hostilities. Now, by my clock, the Second World War ended in September of 1945 with the final peace treaty between the Imperial Japanese government and the Allies, right? But Congress never went back and actually established an end date for the victory tax. They just kept right on rolling and collecting. And then they went right into the Cold War, right? And then they went into the war on war and the war on drugs and the war on poverty and the war on blah, 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 blah. So that's what they're using as their excuse for continuing to pick your pockets every year. And that's why every president makes a declaration of some kind of war on something. And that's why every president makes a declaration of emergency, national emergency. We just had Donald Trump do it this year. It's so they can keep this ball rolling, and they can keep using military courts, and they can keep using military-style government at the territorial level. Now, we on the land, we've been at peace for 150 years. We haven't gone to war. Land jurisdiction of this country hasn't been at war in 150 years. It's all been the territorial government and the municipal government. We're completely peace-loving. President Andrew Johnson, who was the vice president that took over after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, declared 3 times on the public record that the land jurisdiction was at peace. The land jurisdiction is still at peace. When you sign up and you are in the federal civilian service or military service, you're in a different status. You're working for a different country, in effect. So when you join the service, you are accepting federal citizenship. And as we all know, when you join the service, you're under the rules of the service, right? Suddenly you have to take orders. You have to obey every title and jot of the military code. And you're subject to the military justice code and all of that, right? Well, there's a presumption, since you're not on the land and your name is still at sea, that you're under territorial jurisdiction and that you have to obey their military code.
Well, Anna, when you join the military, you're joining the United States Army, the United States Navy, not the United States of America's Army.
Right, exactly. So that's where the dual citizenship comes in. And since the Vietnam War, you don't even properly get discharged when you leave the service. Most people come out of the service, they get their DD-214, they think, okay, that's that. I'm back in civilian status. I'm wearing my civvies. Okay, I don't have to salute anymore. But in fact, they're never discharged unless they absolutely, again, write a letter to the head of their branch of service and say, here attached is a carbon copy of my DD-214. I have, as of this date, whenever date that is or was, returned to my birthright political status as a national of Texas or Michigan or wherever you were born. Just like you write a letter to the IRS commissioners and tell them, I revoke my election to pay federal taxes. It's the same thing. You have to do it on a personal basis. And when you do this, you need to send it in a registered letter so that you have control of that mailing and you have record of it. You want a return receipt requested. And until you do, they can presume that you are still in the military. They can pull you off the street and put you right back in a uniform and send your butt off to Timbuktu. So you do have to give them notice that you're returning to your birthright political status as a civilian.
Do the court clerks, if you file stuff like that with the local court clerks, is that sufficient to get it done?
None of them can carry it.
The question was, will a court clerk filing suffice? And the answer for the name jurisdiction things is no. The court clerks are territorial or municipal courts. They can't do anything about the land jurisdiction records. And you have to have your name back on the land jurisdiction. Now there are some counties that will not record a deed of reconveyance. They don't really have a good reason for not doing it. They just say they won't. So if your county won't record your deed of reconveyance, moving your name back from the jurisdiction of the sea to the jurisdiction of the land, you find another county that will. Since these are all federated states and federated counties, it doesn't matter where you file it, just that you get it filed in the right jurisdiction, or recorded in the right jurisdiction is the proper way of saying that. So if you go down to your local land recording district office or county office and they try to obstruct your deed of reconveyance, just go down to the next county and keep looking. You'll find one. Yeah.
Yes, I have a question. My husband is a veteran, and if he goes back to do this name change, like you're saying, does that, will they look at this and say, okay, he gets no benefits then from the military? Does that exclude him from receiving what he's getting now?
This process, the question was, if a veteran goes and, gives notice that he's returned to civilian status, will that mean he will lose his benefits? And the answer is that no, it does not mean that you lose any benefits. None of this affects anything that you're owed. It doesn't affect your Social Security, doesn't affect your military retirement or medical benefits. This is simply returning all of this property to its proper jurisdiction. It does not affect what you're owed. So if you were vested in the Social Security system, your person is still vested in the Social Security system. If you are owed military retirement, you are still owed that retirement. Just like I could retire from GM and I could move to a different country and I would still get my benefits from GM. It's the same thing, because remember, the territorial government is a corporation. So is the municipal government a corporation. These are just gigantic, unimaginably huge corporations. So no, none of this process affects any federal benefits that you're owed. It just affects your status, your political status, and where you're standing, whether you're standing on the sea or on the land, and how you're standing. Are you standing as a British citizen, or are you standing as an American? Right now, they have you all down as British. I know that sounds bizarre, but you know, the territorial government has been run by Great Britain for 150 years. And so when you have two choices. Either you're a ward, a lawful ward as an American in international jurisdiction, and they have to, under the delegated powers, they have to act as your trustee when you are in international jurisdiction, when you are in a delegated portion of international jurisdiction. So you should be safe. Okay.
Okay, say I go ahead and do my name change, and I send off to the IRS. I don't owe taxes, but I want to tell them that I don't want to ever want them to withhold any taxes or pay taxes. What my standing would be with the federal government, the IRS.
Well, you won't have any trouble from them. What you'll
Okay, but what I'm getting to is, all these years that I paid taxes and filled out that 1040, and I did not know because I was not informed that it was voluntary, is there any way that I could recoup all the money that I have put into the federal government?
It's spent.
Yes.
Good.
The amount of money that's owed to each one of us is absolutely astronomical. It's unimaginable. Because it's not just what they owe to us, it's what they owe to our great-grandparents and our parents. Virtually everything that you can think of has been rolled forward in generation-skipping trusts. Now, what a generation-skipping trust does is it protects assets from taxation. It's a way of shielding assets. And basically what it does is it knocks it forward to the next generation. So if you just go along with the program as it is now established, all of the money that you're owed, that you paid in for mortgages, and that you paid in for taxes that you didn't know, all of that is going to be reinvested by gigantic investment funds. That's all going to get knocked down the road to the next generation. But if they don't know any more than you did and they don't claim it, it's just going to keep rolling and rolling and rolling. And nobody who's alive, except the pension fund managers and the politicians, will ever see any benefit from it.
common amongst people having legal name changes already. Obviously, I would be reconveying my birth name as opposed to my new legal name for being adopted.
Right.
So how would I bind those two together? I should be focused. If I'm doing a deed of reconveyance, I'm targeting my birth name,
Right.
and then somehow adding an addendum to that process with my assumed legal name.
Right. You can have a large number of assumed names. Now, when I was born, the name I was given was Anna Maria Wilhelmina Hanna Sophia Reisinger von Reichenstein von Lettow Verbeck.
Wow, you were special.
Can you imagine being a little kid trying to learn how to spell your name? Anyway, there was no way that that moniker fit into any of these systems. So what they did is they just grabbed the first name of each segment, you know, the first name, the first middle name, and the first last name, and that was arbitrarily, for their purposes, the public name, the trade name that they seized upon. Now, years went by and I decided to become a writer of sorts, to at least to the extent that I'd write this stuff down so that people knew it. And so I took a pen name. And what I did was I just shortened my next name to Von Reitz instead of von Reichenstein. So I have a pen name. And when I went through and claimed all my assumed names, I claimed my pen name and all sorts of variations and combinations, as well as my presumed birth name. So when you have a pen name or a nickname or a married name or any name that you've ever used in business at all, go ahead and claim that as an assumed name. You don't have to reconvey anything except the trade name that you were given, which is your upper lowercase first, middle, last. Once you reconvey that one, which is the name that appears on your birth certificate, only upper lowercase. Once you reconvey that one, you can seize upon all of the other variations, all the uppercase variations by a certificate of assumed name. And I get this question from women quite often is, I had a maiden name and now I have a married name, or I had a maiden name, a married name, and I got divorced. And what do I do? Well, you claim all the variations as assumed names so that you're in control of those names if you ever get hauled into court for anything. I've had, yes?
Go ahead and finish on that assumed name that you were talking about, then I have a question, please.
Sure. Now, bear in mind, this is happening to your children, too. The same system that snatched you up when you were a few days old and deprived you of your identity is happening to your children. When I was aware of this, right? I had just given birth to my son. It was a difficult delivery. It was premature. I was 40 years old. I knew that this was going on. And I resisted signing paperwork at the hospital because I knew that was how they were snatching babies. Essentially, at the moment that they're born, these corporate goons come in and they snatch your child's identity and they register that name as chattel belonging to their corporation. So I refused to sign the paperwork. Their response was to bring in 2 women and a very large male nurse. And they guaranteed me that if I did not sign that paperwork, I would not be allowed to take my son home. Now, if you can think of anything uglier than snatching the identity of a little baby in the cradle and claiming them as property of a commercial corporation, I don't know of anything more evil, but that's what's been going on here in this country. And when you go onto my website, you go to looking for those PDF forms, you'll find that one of them is called the baby deed. And this is just a very simple form that needs to be filled out when a baby is born and recorded with the land recorder's office, that is giving the basic information of who the parents are and where they're living and claiming that baby's name and putting it on the land jurisdiction to counteract what these rats are doing. Now, there is a saving grace. When they take that information at the hospital and they process it and they issue a birth certificate based on that, that birth certificate is always filed a few days after the birthday. So the baby remains the entitlement holder, the holder in due course. You always have a prior claim in commerce because of that. But you have to exercise that claim. You have to know that that claim is there. And the parents, if you want to do what's right by your children and by your grandchildren, you want to get that deed recorded for them on the land jurisdiction so that they don't have to go through all this as they're growing up, and so that they will have a claim to their heritage. There are all sorts of scam artists and all sorts of things going on trying to deprive people of their heritage. They're not just trying to steal from you, they're trying to steal all that's owed to your grandparents and your great-grandparents too. They're trying to separate us from our names. There are all sorts of internet gurus out there telling you that you have to set up a trust and you have to roll your assets over into a trust. If you do that, you break the continuity of the evidence. You lose connection to your name. So you need to keep your name. You need to claim everything back. You don't give anything up. You don't roll it over into anything else. You already have a trust. You just need to claim and control your trust. So, I'm sorry, I was going on with that.
No. Getting back on the veterans, I did a certificate of name change, and also did the expatriated and the oath document that you put out.
Right?
Would it be necessary now to go back and tell them of my getting out of the service to the head people, since I've done that already? I've taken the name. If they come in under that name, I'm the name holder, so they wouldn't have any jurisdiction over me, correct?
Wrong. You have, if you're in the military and you're retired and you want to be retired, you have to let the head of your branch of service know that you've returned to your birthright political status as a Texan or a Wisconsinite or a Minnesotan. Because otherwise, what they will do, what they exercise, is not your name, it's your title. So what they would be, I don't know what your rank was, but they would be addressing you as, you know, Captain Joe Schmo. They wouldn't be addressing you as you, they would be addressing your office. So that's why you have to make that separate severance with military service.
Okay, would you please go over the last man standing as related to Texas and the best opportunity we have to bring back the national government and the steps to do that?
Okay, that, you know, how does the last man standing rule apply, and, you know, how does all that play into reclaiming your state? Okay, the last man standing rule is a law of contracts. And basically what it says is, even if you have multiple parties to a contract, say that George and I and Jim and John all are parties to a contract with Leo, right? And all of the other parties on my side of the contract are dead. As long as I'm still alive and Leo is still alive, there's still a contract. And I'm able to exercise that contract no matter what. Okay, so that's the last man standing rule. We just had a big adventure over the past 3 years with the last man standing rule. They attempted to vacate the federal side of the Constitution. They couldn't get away from it. The Constitutions are wonderful. They couldn't get rid of the Constitution by any of these various tricks they had tried. Our founders had set it up so well that they could not vacate the Constitution from our side. So they tried to vacate the Constitution from their side. By bankrupting both the federal territorial government and the federal municipal government at the same time, they hoped to vacate the constitutional contract. So I'm sitting here going, oh boy, howdy. How are we going to beat this one? How are we going to keep the constitutional guarantees in place for people in this scenario? So what we did is we created a new contract with a different federal services provider. It turns out that the American Indian nations are federal, but they're not bankrupt. They're separate. They have their own identity. So we were enabled to create and carry forward the Constitution by naming new federal service providers that weren't bankrupt.
If we have Native American heritage in our background, are we covered that way?
The question is, if you have Native American heritage, are you still covered? And yes, you are. In fact, you are better covered than you would have been 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Because as part of that process, we also issued a Declaration of Joint Sovereignty, which allows the Native American tribes, the individuals, to come back on the land. They had been held off in land jurisdiction for 200 years. But now they can be Americans like anybody else. But needless to say, this was a big shock to those that were trying to undermine our Constitution and undermine our government. They didn't like it at all, but they didn't have any choice. We had outfoxed them. And so the Constitution stands because of that, even though both the territorial and municipal governments are bankrupt.
Connected to that, isn't there a bank that you created around the Indian thing? And is it viable? Can we participate in that bank?
Well, at this point, there are several sovereign banks that are operating, and we're trying to figure out how we're going to address all of these various problems, because obviously you've got millions of people who need to get their political status corrected, who are owed money, who are owed property, and trying to come up with a way that's going to be equitable and fast and fair and all these other things has been quite an exercise. We have the Bank of Dene, which is the sovereign bank of the Athabascan people. We have the Lakota Bank, which is the sovereign bank of the Lakota Sioux tribe. And those are operational. The Lakota Bank has been operational for 10 years, I think. And we have the American States and Nations Bank. Now, the American States and Nations Bank is set up as an international trade bank that can operate with 50 state members, not franchises, it's not incorporated. but members. And as each state creates its own state bank again, it will have its own national sovereign bank. So Texas would have its own national bank, because remember, a nation is a state and a state is a nation in this country. So you'll have your own bank here in Texas, but that bank will most likely choose to be part of the American States and Nations Bank umbrella, because that bank has the ability to function in international trade and to indemnify deposits. Yeah, well, it works in real assets: gold, silver, platinum, jewels. We have huge, huge asset dumps all over the world that belong to the American people. And we're now in the process of identifying those and seizing the title to those assets. A lot of banks have tried to play a very vicious game of they've tried to claim that we've abandoned those assets because we haven't been heard from in so long. So they've said that those are abandoned assets, but they're actually assets that belong to the American people. And so we're going back around and tagging those down and dragging them home. And you just can't imagine all the complexities of how these things have gone astray over the course of 150 years, that I think you can imagine.
How do I open an account for American States and Nations Bank?
It's not available to the public yet. It's to individual. It's not set up that way yet, but we're working on it.
Could we go through the Lakota Nation Bank?
You can certainly open up accounts at the Lakota Nations Bank if you're within their service district, which I think is 5 states now. It might be more. You'd have to check with them. The Athabascan Bank, Bank of Dene, is still an institutions-only bank at this point. It's only making institutional clients, but it is open and it's beginning to make some headway. They are looking at a bricks and mortar in Nevada. The Athabascan tribe, by the way, is huge. It goes from Point Barrow all the way down to northern Mexico. A lot of the different tribes, we think of Navajo. Well, Navajo are Athabascan. So they may have different tribal subgroup names, but they're all Athabascans. And so the Athabascans are the major tribal group throughout the western United States, and they'll be having banks in every state. And all of these will be safer to have your money in because they're all dealing in real money. Now, I was telling someone here today about the requirement of the banks to deal in lawful money upon your demand. The 1934 Emergency Banking Act required a very strange arrangement. And that arrangement was that one of their paper IOUs would be equal to one of your silver dollars. But as a result of that, you have the absolute right under that piece of legislation, which has never been repealed, and also under the UN Citral treaties that they signed as part of the UN, that you can stipulate that your money in your account be considered a special deposit and a private account, and that all of the money coming into and out of your account must be denominated as lawful money. Essentially, they don't have enough lawful money to be able to give everybody lawful money, right? But they still have to honor it as if it was lawful money. And they can't go into your account and steal it or administer it or lien it or mess with it if it's a special deposit private account. A lot of this stuff is, we simply haven't known how to work within this system to protect ourselves. You know, there's nothing stopping us from writing the CEO of our bank and saying, oh, by the way, this is a private account, and all funds being transferred in and out of it must be denominated as lawful money. This is a special deposit account. But we don't know to do that, so we don't do it, and that leaves our money adrift. Right now, if you look at if you have a quote-unquote personal bank account, and you look at your check, you'll see your name in all capital letters of some form, and that means it's a public account. That's how the IRS can go in and snatch your money. That's how a creditor can snatch your money. That's how a foreign court order can attach your money in your bank account, is that it has been left in the category of a demand deposit, personal, okay? In federal language, personal means corporate. So you have to inform the bank what you want done with your account, how you want your money denominated. And once you do that, then they are obligated to consider it a special deposit, to consider it a private account, and to consider it lawful money in your account. So even if you come in with Federal Reserve notes, which by the way have been worthless since 2009, and you deposit that in that account, you have this letter of instruction in your file showing it was delivered to the bank, and the bank is under obligation to regard whatever funds are showing in your account as lawful money. And if it's lawful money, they can't touch it.
We can do that now.
You can do that right now.
It's also the state credit unions.
Yes. In days to come, you'll be seeing Texas credit unions. Now, the actual name, the land jurisdiction state, that's International Land Jurisdiction State of Texas, is just Texas with a capital T. The soil jurisdiction state is Texas, all small letters. Prior to 1851, you go back in the records, prior to 1851 where they're discussing states, you'll see Texas written in all small letters. That's the soil jurisdiction Republican state that you're guaranteed at the county level of your government. The international land jurisdiction state is Texas. No state of anything about it, just Texas with a capital T. Now your international land jurisdiction state and your international land jurisdiction union are still standing. So you'll be seeing state credit unions that are not state of Texas credit unions, which are just, you know, Texas credit union, period. Now, the unincorporated United States of America owns those credit unions. But in order to be a member of those credit unions, you're going to have to be a land jurisdiction person. You're going to have to do the effort, make the effort to get your land, your name back on the land jurisdiction before you can be a member of the credit union. Credit unions are by their nature private. So that is one big change that will be coming to the banking system pretty soon. And that way you know for sure that your money isn't going to go anywhere.
incorporated, is what you're saying?
No, the one you probably have now is a federal credit union.
So they're abiding by all the federal laws that are in place.
Right. Well, it's not a bad thing that they are, you know, but they're functioning. They're functioning in a territorial capacity. They're not.
They're not private, but it could change. Is that what you're saying?
There will be a new credit union system that is just Texas.
Okay.
And when that one comes, you'll know that that's a private thing of the actual state. It's not a corporation. It's not a franchise of a federal corporation.
Now, how would I find this out? By calling them?
It'll be apparent from the name.
It'll be what?
It'll be apparent from the name.
Okay.
It'll be just Texas Credit Union.
Okay.
Texas has a banking website, the whole state, and it will break them down, federal credit unions, state credit unions. National
Okay.
credit. You can go to those, it will tell you the whole history of them and everything. Great records on banks.
Okay.
What was the name of that?
Well, I don't remember exactly the name, but if you type in Texas banking regulation,
Okay.
it
Okay.
will light up.
Oh, and I have another question. Everything that you're talking about here today, can we find that on your website? And what about, I've been thinking about purchasing a couple of your books. Is that information in your books?
Well, I'm kind
A
of,
little bit of it in your book?
yeah, I'm kind of shotgunning today and trying to bring everybody up to date. And I do have several books. The gentleman back there, Alan, has a copy of one of them. That one right there, it's called You Know Something is Wrong When, an American Affidavit of Probable Cause. And that's actually a document I prepared as a basic primer for everybody to get the facts down. And you'll see that it's also set up to be our testimony at the World Court.
Because I need it written down. It's a lot of information to
Sure.
take in.
And there's a short version too called America Some Assembly Required. And if you can take things in by sound bites and just let them roll up in your mind like a jigsaw puzzle, that's the fastest way of getting a handle on the whole thing. It's only like 50, 60 pages and it's larger print and, you know, very, very fast way to do it. It's the business history of America.
Oh, okay.
I'll give it to you.
And because of Texas's unique status of being a republic, how can we help move forward to get to the national convention?
Well, you can be a republic and you can be a state. There isn't an either or. It's just, again, a matter of capacity. Are you, like I was explaining with the Republican and a republic and a state and a nation, these are all different capacities, different hats, if you will, that you wear. So you can have a state of Texas, and you can have a national state of Texas, you can have a territorial state of Texas, you can have a municipal state of Texas, and you can have a republic of Texas, and you can have a Republican county and function at the soil level too. So you have soil, land, national, territorial, and municipal jurisdictions. You have 5 different jurisdictions that you can function in. And what you're going to want to do to be part of the Continental Congress is you're going to want to function as Texas, just plain old Texas, right? And then to function as part of the National Congress, which is okay, when I say Continental Congress, continental, think of continent, think of land mass, right? So this is the international jurisdiction of Texas on the land, okay? There's also the jurisdiction of the sea, And in our case, in this country, we split the international jurisdiction of the sea into delegated and non-delegated powers. So when we did that, we created a more complex structure. Normally, a country just has its international land jurisdiction and its international sea jurisdiction, and there's no further subdivision than that. But in America, we had to be fancy. We had to go ahead and delegate some of our international sea jurisdiction to the Brits under that original quid pro quo I described to you when we needed their Navy and they needed our commercial fleet. So we've got delegated and non-delegated powers in the international jurisdiction of the sea. And if you read the Constitution, you'll go and look at Amendment 10, and you'll see that all the non-delegated powers are reserved to the states and people. Okay? So you got soil and land, which are tied together up here, and then below the line, you've got the national, territorial, and municipal are all in the international jurisdiction of the sea. So what I would look at this would be the Republic of Texas gives rise to the national level state of Texas, which gives rise to the territorial state of Texas, which gives rise to the municipal, whatever that's going to be. It's not clear how that's going to be organized from now on. But logically, everything proceeds from the land jurisdiction and the people to the sea jurisdiction. If you don't have land, you don't have sea. So in order to have a country, you have to have your land jurisdiction intact. And so as a result, you have seized back your land jurisdiction here with the Republic, right? You can have a state of Texas at the national level and participate in that Congress too. But that's addressing a different jurisdiction. Sort of like I might be a school teacher during the day and I might be a caterer at night. It's kind of the same thing, where you can have more than one identity or one capacity. But the important part is that you have your land jurisdiction, and your land jurisdiction can then properly administer and direct what goes on in the international jurisdiction of the sea. Instead, we've had it just opposite, where the international jurisdiction of the sea has been running ramshod over the land and the people. Now, to their credit, I have to say that as long as we understand our jurisdiction, the federales understand theirs. They don't give me a bit of trouble. I don't trespass on their delegated authority, and they don't trespass on mine. The problem comes where all these people are getting arrested and thrown in jail and prosecuted is when they trespass upon the delegated authority of the territorial government. So, you know, I'm always the one sitting here saying, you know, yay or nay. Yes, that is your jurisdiction. No, that isn't your jurisdiction. And as long as people follow that and pay attention to whether or not they're stepping on somebody, you know, where they shouldn't be. Well, let's use the taxes as an example. Let's say that I was a federal civilian employee. I work for the FAA. And I say, I don't owe federal taxes. Oh, yes, you do owe federal taxes because you're a federal citizen. You're a federal employee. That makes you a federal citizen. You are subject. Okay? So if I didn't pay taxes and I sent in a revocation or I made some other protest that I wasn't entitled to make, sure, they'll come after me with hammers and tongs, right? But if I stand on me, just my own, my small business income, say, and I make a revocation, they'll never say a word. That's well within my rights. They'll never bother me. Does that make sense? As long as I know where I'm standing and I'm doing what is within my realm, they will never bother me. It's when I trespass against them and start telling them what to do in their realm that they get on the case of anyone who's doing things like it. It's when they get confused. I had a guy who went and thought he was going to take over the state of West Virginia office building. You don't do that. I mean, we're going to get this all straightened out. There's no reason to get militant and start, threatening people. That's not what this is about. This is about reclaiming your property. This is a business deal. This is, correcting a bad error, okay? And getting back control of the government in the hands of the people that it belongs to, instead of letting the hired help run wild, which is essentially what we've been doing. Because all these people are here as hired help. They're here to provide essential government services that have been delegated to them. So what does it mean if I delegate something to you? Okay? I have a duty to dog sit for a friend. Something comes up. I can't do it for whatever reason. So I delegate it to my friend Mark. Okay, well then it's Mark's duty. It's Mark's job to do. Mark has to be there to, feed Fido at 8 in the morning and 6 at night, okay? Now, can I come back and interfere with Mark in his duty? Not unless I release him from it, right? I have to come back and tell Mark, okay, you're off the hook. I'm taking back this duty. But until I do that, Mark is well within his rights to go according to his schedule and according to what he's going to do it and how he's going to do it and all of that, as long as it gets done. And that's where we're at with the federal government. We can go back and we can renegotiate and we can say, oh, well, we're going to take back this delegated power, but we have to do it properly. We can't just go out willy-nilly and, arbitrarily and think we're going to change everything overnight, because it's not going to be that way, not if it's done lawfully. We have to get organized. We have to take back our own names. We have to take back our own states. We have to take back our republics, our counties. We have to do this in a logical way. And if we do that, we can do this peacefully and we can do it fast. That's one young lady.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming. My questions are legion, and I was thinking in quicksand. All that aside, the question that I was asked to ask you because they left, he's hard of hearing and was going crazy. And I hope I've couched this in the proper context in which she meant it. She wanted to know what happens if one has corporations that were done in Nevada or Delaware, or either their companies or in their name. How would that affect? I'm assuming here, name changes, or what would they need to do about corporations that they do have housed in those different states?
Do you know if these are personal name corporations or if these are like actual business corporations?
I'm going to take a leap of faith and say both.
Well, the reason people set up corporations in the state of Delaware is so that they can take advantage of the Chancery Court. Delaware is the only state that has a Chancery Court. And if you want to use the Chancery Court system, that's a whole different thing. That is a territorial system court, and it functions under British equity law. So it kind of depends on what you want to do. That would require me sitting down and trying to figure out with her what her actual purpose was in setting up the corporation there, and what kind of law she wanted to be functioning under.
Okay. I don't know, I'm short of running out and throwing myself in front of their pickup. I'll have to try to couch that in terms to them later. But now that you've mentioned that Delaware is the only state and territory that has a Chancery Court, because, of course, there are lots of people out there who are saying that Georgia has a Chancery Court, that Texas is trying to have a Chancery Court, and therefore people are filing declarations of status in Georgia, thinking that, oh, well, it's a Chancery Court, and now we're home free because we'll take this paperwork and file it in our county, and yay, we'll stick it to them. But what you're telling me is that Delaware is the only state that does actually have a Chancery Court. So does that mean that you cannot invoke the Court of Equity anywhere else?
Well, okay, let's sort this out. This country is supposed to run under American common law. There are all kinds of different common law. There's English common law, there's martial common law. I mean, there's natural common law. I mean, you can go all the way around. Ours is supposed to be American common law, which is distinct from all the others. But like everything else, they've confused it. Long ago, back when the country was founded, we came out of the English common law system. This was prior to the development of equity law. All right, so American and British common law kind of went together for about 100 years. And they were pretty much in agreement, and they were doing fine. And then about 1750, Admiralty law was added to British common law. And that is what happened that polluted the British legal system and turned it into equity law. Now, I think, my personal opinion, is that equity law is totally evil and corrupt. And the reason I say that is it makes the judge the proxy for the king. So you walk into his court, and he's holding the king's proxy, and he can do whatever he wants to a British citizen. Remember I said that they have us all down as British citizens? Right, so you walk into an equity court as a British citizen, and you are totally at the mercy of the judge.
Can I follow you back to the last one?
You can follow me, honey.
I'm going to save my house first. I have no idea how to incorporate all this other information with all the gobbledygook that I've been going down rabbit holes for the last 35 years.
I know. But you know, the truth is always simple. It's all of the lies that are complex.
Welcome to our government. Thank you.
You are welcome.
Since Texas retained all the rights to their own land, and we're the only state that has our own land office,
Does that make any difference in all this?
Well, I think that Texas certainly has a very strong case for its land jurisdiction, and it's fortunate that it does. But all the other states also have their land jurisdiction. It's just mothballed. In the case of the other states, they have what are called statehood compacts, and their land jurisdiction is being managed as a giant trust.
They all ceded their lands to the U.S. government?
No, they did not voluntarily cede anything to the U.S. government. The U.S. government came in after the Civil War and pretended to act as their trustees. And so these land jurisdiction trusts are still there, waiting for the land jurisdiction government to claim them. So now, say in the case of Michigan, Michigan has been operated, you guys have been operating for 23 years. Michigan has been operating for almost 30. They have their land jurisdiction government set up so that they can receive back the Michigan State Land Trust. So now they have the claim on their land, just like Texas has the claim on their land. It's just that they have only claimed back the level of the national state of Michigan. It's kind of inverted. You've gone after the national land jurisdiction, and they've gone after the international land jurisdiction. But it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, what you have to come back to is you have your land jurisdiction guaranteed. And since we made sure that the Constitution was not vacated, everybody still has the opportunity to come back and claim their land jurisdiction and operate it. So the Republic of Texas is grand, and that's right in the way it should be. And if you spin off a state of Texas, that's also good. That's two different capacities of Texas. Remember the two unions I told you about? There's the United States of America unincorporated, which is a union of states on the land. That's what the Republic of Texas would belong to. But the other one, the States of America, that was formed under the Articles of Confederation, that's where you would have a national state of Texas participating in that one. And not necessarily the same people elected to serve the office. Yes, sir.
Not be able to hear me very well.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. I have a son born on an Air Force station, and I'd like to know about the 14th Amendment citizens. Would you speak on that a little, please?
Well, this was a terrible thing that happened after the Civil War. The 14th Amendment citizen was defined as a criminal and a debtor, just by definition. And this was used to basically conduct witch hunts after the Civil War to go find any rebel forces, right? So if you walk into this very day, you walk into a court as a municipal citizen, they're going to attach that to you, and to your person, I should say, and they're going to have you already convicted. When you walk into one of their courts and they're addressing the all capital letters name, it's already decided that you're a criminal and you're convicted, and all that they're going to discuss is how long they're going to keep you in jail and how much they're going to fine you. That's why they have an over 97% conviction rate in these U.S. district courts. They're defining you as a 14th Amendment citizen, and they're just railroading you right on through. So, what happens? When you go back and you claim your name, your trade name, and then you claim your certificate of assumed name, and you have control and you have it on the record, then those courts no longer have jurisdiction. And you can no longer be presumed to be anything that you don't agree to be.
Can you go back and claim it then? If they've taken it away from you?
Sure, you can move to set aside or vacate any improper or null jurisdiction. You can challenge jurisdiction at any time, even long after a case. Yes, sir.
On claiming the land, we in the Republic of Texas, it's been about 4 or 5 years ago, we reclaimed all the boundaries in the Republic of Texas. I notified personally every governor, every county judge in all of our territory. And also, one thing that we've always stated, we still have a land center in Texas. We do not report or have anything to do with the BLM, like all the other states.
Right, well, see, most of the western states do have a relationship with BLM, but it's supposed to be as a caretaker. BLM is supposed to be caretaking the land for those states, and instead they've been coming in and riding roughshod over them. So you're very fortunate that all that work was done and is now in place. That's, in that respect, Texas is probably, I don't know, a decade ahead of most states at least.
Yeah.
But it's something that all the states have to do.
I'll send you a copy of that.
I'd like to see it.
Because we did that, and the BLM has come into North Texas trying to claim a bunch of land along the Red River, can that be stopped this way?
Absolutely. You betcha. They don't have any right to come in here at all. We never gave up any portion of our land jurisdiction. And when I say we, I mean the first union, the unincorporated United States of America, the first union of states, never gave up any land jurisdiction to any foreign power, ever. So when Texas joined that union, they were guaranteed that their land jurisdiction would be inviolate. And that government still stands.
I know that the people in North Texas are having a lot of trouble with it.
Well,
I heard that it's been stopped, but I don't know that for sure.
we have been busily at work stopping all these federal agencies that have been so out of control. We've been stomping them right and left. But that doesn't mean they still won't try to usurp upon property that rightfully belongs to a state. Now, you're in a good position here to argue that and to fight it back. There are states where it's not so easy. Basically, at one point, Nevada was bought and paid for by the mob, by the New York mob. And, retaining the actual land rights of the state has been difficult. But that's the kind of argument that we've had to go through because of all the fraud. I mean, it's like, which state are you talking about? Which United States are you talking about? Which United States of America are you talking about? There's the actual union, which is the United States of America unincorporated, right? And then there's the United States of America Incorporated with a capital T on the. And then there's the United States of America Incorporated with a small t on the. I mean, these guys have spun off more versions of United States of America than you can even begin to imagine. last time I looked, we had clocked 350 different definitions of United States.
Are they using all of those to create the different corporations where they're buying up all the stocks of these major companies?
Yeah, they're using all these different names and deceit, you know, to basically fake you out and make you think that they're something that they're not, or that, you know, to put you in some capacity that you're not even beginning to think of. There's been legal chicanery in this country, the likes of which has never been seen since Sodom and Gomorrah. It's just the most absurd amount of confusion and chaos.
Well, I just read recently where the government owns tens of millions of shares of some of the major corporations.
Yes. We went to the patent office and we researched the patent office and found that our delegated authority had been abused there as well as everywhere else. And as a result, all these territorial governments are incorporated here in America, and we do own them. Yes, sir.
Steve, I think you may have already answered this with regard to the private versus public. Technically, right now I'm operating as a U.S. person because I've not reconveyed my trade name and changed my status back to the private side. Before I start addressing anybody, any public official in the public, for example, the IRS, do I want to position myself from the private side first, having done all of my reconveyance?
Well, there's a lot of confusion about people talking about the private side and the public side, because what was public is now private, and what was private was now public, and it was part of this unlawful conversion that happened back in the 1930s. So basically what we think of as private isn't necessarily private, and what we think of as public isn't necessarily public. These straw man names, these three names, all capital letter names, those are all public. And so when you're talking about this, I think it's perhaps easier to just look at it in terms of claiming back your names and having control of them regardless of whether they're in public or private capacity. I was explaining earlier that the territorial government has control of commerce. It does not have control over international trade. So in order for them to try anyone in their courts, they have to assume that you're operating in commerce. Now, when you flip this over and you bring your names back onto the land jurisdiction, the presumptions change. Then you have to, the presumption has to be that you're operating in international trade then. Do you see what I mean? It just flips everything back on its head. Everything is upside down and backwards now, okay? When you come back onto the land and you claim all of your names, it flips back over to the other presumptions. And they don't have control of anything that's not commerce. Yeah, the mics are feeding back. It was your electric personality.
Okay, I want to clarify the land of Texas. In December 19th, 1836, in Houston.
Would you step up to the mic, please, ma'am? I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Is it going?
Yes.
And on December 19th, 1836, Sam Houston signed an act defining the boundaries of the Republic of Texas. And in that, there was a treaty with the United States and Spain, and the president, Sam, was authorized and required to open negotiation with the government of the United States of America as soon as, in his opinion, the public interest required it. So they defined in this act the boundaries of Texas at that time. And then when they were annexed into the United States, it was under the agreement that the land in the Republic of Texas always belonged to the people and would still belong to the people. And that's why we have the General Land Office, and it never was in the United States government, the land. That's why.
Right, that's just more confirmation of what I said, that we never gave up any of the land jurisdiction anywhere, not in any state. So the people own the land, both the soil and the land being international land jurisdiction.
How does that fall back under where we took all of this land away from the indigenous people, Native Americans? Are they actually the landholders, or are we, or?
Well, there's a lot of discussion about that. Since our country is still viable and still has its government functioning, you know, we still hold the, I guess you would say, the ownership or the proprietary title. The thing about a nation, you can have many nations occupying the same land, right? So, for example, in Wisconsin, where I grew up, we have the Winnebago Ho-Chunka Nation, and they live cheek and jowl with everybody else. And so, you know, again, we're getting down to the issue of capacity. A Winnebago native born in Black River Falls, Wisconsin, is a member of their tribe, of their nation, right? But they put on their other hat, and they're a Wisconsinite. They're, you know, born there on the land like everybody else.
Dual citizenship?
It's not really a citizenship. It's a nation can be born of many different distinctions. You can have a nation that's born by family membership. You could have it born of a religious affiliation. You could have it born of an ethnic cultural group. A nation is a rather fluid concept, and you can have many different nations occupying the same space, the same land space. But those who join together to form a state or a republic form a nation, because you have, in order to have a state or a republic, you have to have a nation of people who are allied by an agreement to be part of that. Right? So you're the nation of Texas. You're the people of Texas. And you've come here as Texans, or Texians. Have I worn you out?
No, I got it.
My question is as far as the Indian nations go, my understanding is they never felt they owned the land. They only were caretakers of it for the supreme being. So therefore, in reality, we don't own the land. We're only caretakers for God. But we've divided it up for us to take care of particular sections. And I guess the ownership is like, why do we keep wanting to say that we own this or we own that when we really are caretakers and we shouldn't have to pay taxes to them to take care of the land that we have, in our sense, bought, that type of thing.
Well, that is the traditional Native American view. When the Europeans showed up here and they said, we want to buy your land, they laughed at them and said, well, isn't it apparent that the land owns us? We don't own it. We come forth from it. We go back to it. Where's the ownership here? So, you know, that is the traditional Native American view on land. Though, in certain respects, the territorial government, at least, has made such a terrible job of taking care of the land in so many places that some of the Native American tribes have made a bid to own the land in their states. And that can be somewhat problematic. Everything that I get from the international community is that everybody needs to just kind of settle back and cooperate with each other and deal with the real issues that are at hand. You know, the safety of the people, the protection of private property, the wise and kind use of public property for the benefit of the state or the people that are living in the state, regardless of what their ethnic background was or what color skin they have.
Well, in reality, we as children of God were given God's land to act as conservators.
Right. Spelled out in Genesis 1:26-28. That's our job. We're supposed to be here taking care of it for future generations and enjoying it ourselves right now. So hopefully we are. I hope we are enjoying more of our freedom, and that as we go forward here, we'll get these business issues taken care of, because people try to look at this in terms of politics. It's not really about politics. It's about business. It's about getting our business taken care of, getting our names and taking control of our assets. If we take control of our assets and do a good job of it, nobody's going to interfere with us, because it's already agreed that it's ours. We have to come forward and claim it. We have to act in self-governance, like you're doing here. And as long as we do that, there's nobody who has any greater claim to this country than we do.
Would there be a possibility of I just went blank.
It's okay.
Like a class action lawsuit by the people of America to go through the court system to get the people that are running our country out and re-electing a new group of people to help us run our country?
Well, right now, the only kind of government that we have there in Washington, D.C. is a corporate structure that's bankrupt. So in point and fact, when it comes right down to it, the government that we have in place right now that is functional is at that original Union level. The United States of America, unincorporated, is still functioning. And because the Constitution was not vacated, all of the parties are still in place, and they still have to obey the constitutions, which is, you know, that's what's protecting us now. Because otherwise, if they'd gotten away with what they intended, they would have taken this entire country as payment for debt.
Let me ask you over here, sir.
Whoa!
I got a maze up here. Watch yourself.
Oh my gosh.
I think you lost your mic.
I probably did.
What I wanted to ask you, because it's unclear to me, when you say the United States of America, unincorporated, is still there, what body is still there? Or is it nothing more than the documentation?
If you reclaim your name, like
The body at that level has always been there. And the strange thing about it is this is where the real history of America is wonderful. Remember, I described for you the situation at the end of the Revolutionary War, where we needed the British Navy and they needed our Navy. So we needed the protection of their Navy for our commercial fleet. Well, at the same time, back in those days, in order for you to have a commercial fleet and to have a Navy and those things, you had to have a head of state. You could not function as a republic at that time without having a head of state in those jurisdictions. So for the purposes of those jurisdictions, we had to declare a head of state. And that would have normally meant choosing one of the European monarchs, like the King of Spain or the King of France or the King of England, to act as our head of state in those jurisdictions. So we had to have somebody that could operate at a sovereign level other than the King of England, who was already taking a big chunk of the delegated powers, right? There had to be another sovereign who could operate the non-delegated powers in the international jurisdiction of the sea. So they looked around and they found a young colonel who had been in the Continental Army who had that kind of sovereignty in England as a result of the Norman conquest. His name was William Belcher. And so they used his individual sovereignty, and they made him the head of state, not the president, not the king, nothing like that, but the head of state. And so then they actually sailed the entire fleet, whether it was under delegated power of the United States or whether it was under the non-delegated power of the United States of America, under his seal, his coat of arms. And if you look up the Great Seal of the United States and the Great Seal of the United States of America, you'll see that they are very similar, except that one occurs inside of a circle and the other one is what they call open. It doesn't have a circle around it. The Great Seal of the United States of America is open. It does not have a seal because it carries the full sovereign power. The Great Seal of the United States is enclosed by a circle because it's delegated power. Okay? So we have two seals, and they are both in the Belcher family array. They were issued under his name and under his sovereign seal. And they were sovereigns in England because of the Norman conquest. And they were still sovereigns at the time of the Revolution. So those are his seals, and that's what they did their bargaining under in those jurisdictions. After the war, he extended his individual sovereignty to all of the veterans of the war and to all of the mothers and daughters of the mothers on the land to come after. So when people say that they're sovereign, you literally are sovereign. Americans do have sovereignty. It's just that you can't be a sovereign citizen. Or a private citizen. Citizen is a public capacity. You cannot be obligated to a government and be sovereign of that government. Okay, that's an oxymoron. That's two mutually exclusive things right there. So you can't be a private citizen, you can't be a sovereign citizen. But you are, each and every one of you, sovereign if you were born on the soil of this land, because William Belcher extended his sovereignty to all of the military veterans and to all of the people that were born on the land after that. Now, that does not mean that he gave up the office of head of state. He still had responsibilities. And his progeny still have responsibilities. And so that's what happened, is that despite the fact that everything had gone so haywire and had been hornswoggled for so long, and there was so much acrimony and so many fights and threats, we still knew this. We still knew that the United States of America, unincorporated, was alive, and that it still held the jurisdiction in international affairs. So that's what we used when we came back and, started making these moves to protect the Constitution from going vacant on the federal side and all these other things. is that we came back and operated that level of the government to pose a barrier so that they couldn't just come in here and let the secondary creditors of the territorial and municipal corporations run rampant. So yes, that still exists.
Within the United States in the last many years, there's been talk of constitutional convention. Now, after everything that you have said, which constitution are they talking about?
That is exactly the problem. You hit the nail on the head. That is exactly the problem, because 9/10 of the time when you hear them talk about a constitutional convention, they're talking about the territorial states of states. And you can tell which one it is because there are 7 insular states that they have that are extra that aren't our states. They've got the state of New Columbia and the state of Puerto Rico and the state of Guam. We don't have any of those states in our group.
Where is New Columbia?
That's what they're calling the District of Columbia. They've issued a territorial state of states since 1984. They've had a state of state called the state of New Columbia. So that's what Mr. Obama was talking about when he was talking about the 57 states, is territorial states of states. And that is supposedly, they're supposed to be just taking care of the affairs and the business of the state of state territorial citizens, right? And they're counting all of us as territorial state of state citizens.
So, Anna, if they are going to have a constitutional convention, would we prefer to have them use the Constitution of the United States?
Well, since they're a foreign government, with respect to us, we don't have anything to say about them having a constitutional convention. What we want to work on is having our own constitutional convention, which would be a continental Congress.
And that would be of the Constitution for the United States.
Exactly, and for the national level state of states, the 50 states instead of the 57 states.
Well, my concern about that is who's going to be in there being the delegates to that convention, and will they basically railroad that Constitution so that it can't do anything for us?
Well, here's the deal. Once you go back on the land, that is your Constitution. And only people that have their name back on the land jurisdiction can serve as delegates. Yeah, the way to think of this is that the territorial government is managed by Britain. It's British. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. I have another question. You referred earlier to the fact that the income tax that was paid in the lady sitting over there, that she could get it back. But if it is denoted as a voluntary gift,
which it is,
then can we ask for that back?
You can, because it was taken under fraudulent non-disclosure, fraudulent self-interested non-disclosure. Now, bear in mind that the organization that took that from you is now bankrupt.
Right.
So what you're doing is you're making a claim against a bankrupt entity as a priority creditor. Okay. Now, I don't think that they can, of themselves, they cannot give it all back to us, okay? But where we do get it back is when we claim back our trust accounts.
I just wanted to add that for the record.
Sure.
Could we, I'm trying to think how to put this. Could we file a claim against all of their corporate holdings, as in all the stocks and stuff?
Already doing it.
Yeah, but
It's already done.
The United States of America, unincorporated, is a corporate corporate entity, even though it's unincorporated. And so we have done that in spades, and we have our claims fully in view. We've had them cured for over a year, and we are bringing suit to bring all of the assets of the states of states, the territorial states of states, back to the states of America.
When you say we, who is we, you and a group of people, or?
The United States of America unincorporated, those of us who were awake, went ahead and we put this all together, we took it to the courts, and we have it in the Uniform Commercial Code. We processed the notices, we processed the non-UCC claims, and we have processed the agricultural liens, which is all of this land that has been held in trust, like the Western States land, and all of this land that's been held for us while our national states of states were not functioning. Yeah, we put the claims in on them so that it'll get rolled back, and then when that's rolled back, it goes out to the states.
So you're going through some kind of court or court first process? What court jurisdiction are you needing?
There's only one national court left in this country. It's the United States Court of Federal Claims, and then there's the World Court. So if we don't get satisfaction from the United States Court of Federal Claims, and it does look like we will, then it goes to the World Court. And but it does look very promising. We should get satisfaction from the U.S. Court of Federal Claims. They're not particularly happy because it means the loss of a lot of the power that the territorial government has had over things. But what it does mean is that all of these things, like your state capitol building and your state parks and any federal lands that are in the state, all of that comes rolling back. All the things that were claimed by the state of states will come back.
In that case, what about all of the land that was sold to the Russians that was BLM land, giving them all the uranium? Was that?
Well, here's the thing. That was taking place in Nevada, or, yeah? Now, Nevada's one of those states in waiting. It's not really a state yet. It's got all the promises and gewgaws, but it doesn't have that separate status internationally. So in that case, the BLM was acting as a trustee and caretaker for the people of Nevada. And they went ahead and they made this deal because, for whatever reason, they figured that this deal was good. Now, can the people of the state of Nevada get organized and nix it? You betcha. They can come back and they can nix the whole thing. But they have to get organized. They have to reclaim their names. They have to reorganize their counties. They have to, form their state. And then they can say, oh, no, you're not doing that the way we want you to do it.
Fraud. It was done fraudulently anyway.
Yeah.
We put weeds on them.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
I was just wanting to point out, whenever I see the state of or the United States of, the of is denoting ownership to me, where if you say the United States of America, or you say the state of Texas, not the state of Texas, because the of is saying that the state of states, which is Washington, D.C., owns it. So, in my understanding.
Well, of is one of those words that can be kind of deceptively used. It means, in legal terms, outside of, besides, in addition to, or belonging to. So if you use it in the sense of belonging to, it would be the state belonging to Texas, right? But if you use it in the state of besides, or apart from, then it means a state apart from Texas. If it's a state apart from Texas, that would be a good description of a territorial state, right? See how duplicitous these critters are? They just use these words in so many duplicitous, sneaky ways that it kind of boggles your brain. There's just so much going on with that. Right. Or Bill Clinton, I did not have sex with that woman.
Don't worry. Anna, you raise a real question in my mind when you talk about these states in waiting. If they're in waiting, which means they are not a state, then they don't have to secede. Can they just tell them, we don't want anything more to do with the United States?
Well, their status is basically as corporations that have been, and trusts that have been insured a certain deal, okay? And it's, in theory, they could say, oh, well, we're separate countries now. We don't want to go through with that deal. We don't want to become part of the United States of America. In theory, they could do that. Would it be good if they did that? No, because there are a lot of advantages to having a union of states such as we've had. It's just that the way that this has operated is not what the founders had intended or what the people had intended. It's been operated as mere corporate franchises of a giant federal corporation, and the people have had very little to say about what the hired help did with their property or with their lives. And now, if I'd say there were 37 states that were enrolled at the time of the Civil War. If all those states come back together and 30 out of 37 vote to enroll the western states, well, then that'll just roll over in a single congressional action, and all of them will be on the board. And that would then empower them to act within the given framework that the founders intended. And then they would have control of their land jurisdiction, just like we were talking about the Uranium One deal. The people of Nevada could say, nope.
But the fact is, they could if they wanted to get out.
Yeah. All right, there are international treaties involved, okay? So that's why they fight the secession idea. When you have an international treaty, it's the highest form of law. And we are very, very, very seldom operating at the level of treaty. We're most often operating at the level of a public law at most. And in fact, that's what the Civil War was all, the reason we call it a civil war. We've been taught something that's fundamentally wrong. Well, actually, we've been taught a lot of things that are fundamentally wrong. But one of the things that really messes us up is we've been taught to call what happened during Abraham Lincoln's administration a civil war. It wasn't a war. It was not a war in any sense. It was a mercenary conflict on our shores. It didn't really have anything to do with our sovereign government. It had to do with two government service providers having catfight. We had the States of America, that was the union formed under the Articles of Confederation in 1781, split up. They couldn't agree anymore. So when the States of America went through that break and the southern states succeeded and formed the Confederate States of America, that was a breakaway from the Confederation of States that was supposed to be operating our national government. but was not our national government, okay? And they were fighting with the territorial United States, the British-backed United States of America, Incorporated. Okay, so you've got one foreign federal service provider faced off against some members of another group that's supposed to be providing governmental services at another level. They're going head to head here. There's no declaration of war. You cannot find a declaration of war related to the Civil War if you were to look all day, every day for the rest of your life. It doesn't exist. Now, Abraham Lincoln made a declaration about Fort Sumter, but that was an executive order type declaration. It was not a declaration of war by the Congress. So there is no official declaration of war starting any kind of conflict for a civil war. It wasn't a war. No declaration of war, no peace treaty ending it. By definition, it's not a war. Articles of, well, here's another one. The Reconstruction Acts. Almost all the Reconstruction Acts are still in effect. 150 years later, they haven't been repealed. If they're not repealed, they still stand. Now, a few sections of it has been repealed. Why hasn't all of it been repealed? Well, it's because our government at the national level has never been reformed. It's still in abeyance. We're reforming it right now. This. Now, you guys are doing the Republic of Texas. That gives you the basis of your land jurisdiction government. Once you have your land jurisdiction in place, then you can pick up your delegated international sea jurisdiction and your non-delegated international sea jurisdiction. Then you can function as states, too. See? Once you have your land, you have your sea. But if all you have is your sea, you don't have anywhere to stand. You don't have your terra firma. You have to have your land before you can have your sea.
What kind of rule are we truly under? Is it military rule right now in this country?
Okay, think of it in terms of delegated and non-delegated authority. The question was, are we under some sort of military rule in this country? We are being ruled by the delegated powers. Now, if you look up the Constitution, you'll find 19 different delegated, enumerated powers. These are powers that the British king was enabled to exercise in our behalf as our trustee on the high seas and navigable inland waterways. Now, people tend to think that that just means out there on the ocean literally, but it doesn't. There's a lot more to the international jurisdiction of the sea than just the sea. Corporations are all in the international jurisdiction of the sea, for example. But when you go through those 19 delegated powers, you'll see exactly what the king has and what was left to us. And since those are delegated powers, remember, if we get organized, we can change those delegations.
In 2005, when we came together and decided to put the Republic of Texas back under a constitution that would work, not the state of Texas Constitution, we had a fellow check with the Secretary of State, ask for a certified copy of the present Constitution. He was told there is no such thing as a certified copy of any Constitution except the 1836 Republic of Texas. And I'm just wondering if maybe there are no certified states because they're all corporations.
Well, again, those are all things, those states that we've been dealing with all our lives are territorial, and they are corporations. Did we ever have a contract with a corporation? No. What's holding us together is the treaties that were established with the king and the Constitution coming out of that agreement. That's why one of the constitutions is called the Original Equity Contract, and that is the Constitution for the United States of America. And that's the only one that really counts, because everything else is delegated from that. And so when we came back in and made the claim, we made it in behalf of the states of America, the national level missing states. And we've got until November to get enough of the states back on the board to forestall the territorial mortgage. See, what's happened is they've gone ahead and they've gone out and they've hypothecated all this debt. So they got a $20 trillion debt over here. The British government, the British territorial government, has a $20 trillion debt over here. Over here, we've got, what, $2,000 trillion worth of debt that's owed the American people? We can wipe away their debt in a heartbeat. We don't even have to think about their debt. But unless we get our act together and claim our assets and start administering our business and taking care of these things, their secondary creditors, the international banks that they're in hock to, will come in and start claiming our assets as surety for their debts. And they're not going to go after paper assets. They're going to go after our land and our homes and everything else. So this is the crazy situation we've gotten ourselves into by not knowing this history and not responding to it appropriately.
So even though they come in to claim it, we cannot claim that everything was done fraudulently and null and void?
Well, we can certainly claim that some of it was, and we should, and we did, and we continue to make that claim. But some of it was done according to Hoyle and Doyle, and we have to pay for that. That's it's a contract that we have. The states are supposed to pay for these designated, delegated services. Now, we can argue over how much and when and where, but essentially there is a business contract for services there, and that's why we have the Essential Services Clause under Article 4 of the Constitution. But, that is so trivial compared to the amount of assets that the people and the government are actually owed that we don't even have to worry about it. All we have to do is take the authority in hand and say, okay, do the bookkeeping. Pay this out of this pot. The big problem that we're having at that level is getting to the point where everybody agrees that somebody has the authority to say, take the money out of that pot and pay this. That's how stupid it is. But because we have not been organized, and because these other layers of government have been organized as corporations and bankrupted, it's a humongous conundrum. It's like a ball of wax times 10. But we are making a lot of headway, and we did get going. I mean, my husband and I have been at this since since 1998, really. But the actual claims process since 2008. So 10 years. And at the end of the day, all it's going to do is it's going to do that bookkeeping, get everybody back onto the good side of the ledger, back in the black instead of the red, and get everybody's property sorted back out to them. But we have to get that national level of government up and rolling, and we have to take care of our own business. Because if we don't self-govern, somebody's going to come in and say, oh, we're your trustees, and we're going to dispose of this.
So what's the contract to prove you're our trustee? And if it's not fraudulent, then they gotta put the stand on it.
Well, they can't prove that, they can't prove any fraud because, you know, there's enough evidence. But the reason that we're in court right now is to bring forward that claim so that we do have authority to settle that debt and set that aside. Because right now that is a big issue of, you know, these guys are $20 trillion in debt, and who's going to pay it?
Can we lay claim to all of their assets?
And we have.
Multiple millions of dollars?
Oh, yes.
Trillions?
Yes, absolutely.
You talk a lot about the secondary credit liens and all of this, and we're all at different stages of understanding. Even the simple stage is hard at times to understand it. And I'm just trying to correlate at the moment. There's such a thing as a UN Agenda 21. And I hear from, it's Margaret Tavares out in California about the fires and the attempts to take the land away from the people.
Right.
Can I assume that UN Agenda 21 and things like Hurricane Harvey and the fires are all part of the secondary creditors' efforts to swindle us? Is UN Agenda 21 the second credit?
You got it.
Okay.
So I had a good light bulb go off.
Yeah, everybody's after our stuff because we own everything. We own all of the territorial governments in the world. Think about that. You see China spelled in all capital letters? That's a municipal franchise of the U.S. You see Japan in all capital letters? That's a municipal franchise of the United States.
So we've been loaning ourselves our own money then?
Yes, we have been loaning ourselves our own money, and nobody has been in control to take it out of one pot and put it in another, and that's caused the whole problem.
Well, Anna, if those are franchises of the United States, and the United States is a franchise of Britain, then Britain owns all of it.
Well, actually,
It goes back to the Vatican? I don't know.
no, they were all chartered here. All of those entities, even the United Kingdom and Great Britain and England and all caps, all of those things were chartered here. All the territorial governments too. So when you see it in upper lowercase, all that belongs here also. And not only that, all of the corporations that were chartered under all of those state-of organizations, it's all ours. We own the entire world. Now, of course, we don't want to keep the entire world. You know, we're not megalomaniacs, but we are the inheritors of megalomaniacs. These guys had it set up so that they were going to occupy our vacated government, make use of us as a staging ground for the greatest heist in history. They were going to take over the entire world and use us as their base because our government wasn't operating. They could come in here and you know, wheel and deal wild and free, make use of our patent office to set up all of these organizations, and then when they did this bankruptcy, they would own it all. The banks would own it all.
But who is they?
International banks.
Okay.
Yep.
So they're the ones behind it.
Oh yeah, the international banks have set this all up, and they just used us because we our government was in abeyance. It was a good staging ground for them to launch their operation. But now,
So we're just a front?
yeah, we were just a front. We were being used as a front. They were operating through our patent office. The Brits got control of our patent office, and they abused the delegated authority of the patent office. Serco is the name of the gigantic government services corporation out of Britain that acts as the paymaster for this entire thing.
It's my understanding that the King of England, in sometime in the 1200s, ceded all of his holdings to the Vatican, to the Catholic Church.
Well, one of the kings of England ceded all of his holdings, but King John didn't own very much. You have to remember that that's less than maybe 110 years. Let me think. William of Normandy died in 1087 AD, and the Magna Carta was in 1215. And in 1213, King John signed over his holdings to the Pope by default. By signing the Magna Carta, he triggered an agreement he had with the Pope that would roll all of his holdings over into the Pope's bailiwick. But you have to remember that after the Norman conquest, England was owned by the Normans, not by the English. After the Norman conquest, it was the French that came from Normandy, who were the conquerors in the Norman conquest, that owned England. And those people were the Norman barons. They were barons in Normandy, but they were kings in England, and that's what everybody forgets. Imagine the situation. You're sitting in Texas, okay? You're in Texas, and you and your neighbors decide you're going to make war on Oklahoma, okay? This is the situation between the British and the French, okay, during the Norman conquest. And you have a claim against land in Oklahoma. You have a claim that's valid, but they won't honor it. So you go to war with them, and you beat them. Okay, so you roll in there, and by conquest of war, you now own Oklahoma. That's what happened in the Norman conquest. The Normans came barreling across the English Channel. They beat the English army. They took it over. They owned it lock, stock, and barrel, and they took an audit called the Doomsday Book that stands to this very day. They went out and they counted how many sheep and how many pastures. Okay? The Normans took it all. And after William died in 1087, he made his senior barons all sovereigns in their own right in England. The men who followed him across the English Channel and fought for him and were his cousins and relatives, he made them all kings in their own right in England. They remained barons. They remained under his thumb in France. But in England, after his death, they all became separate individual sovereigns in their own right, with their own land holdings, their own grand houses. Everything was parceled out to them. And King John had just a little titular head of state office and very few land holdings. So, you know, King John signing away his land holdings would be kind of like, I don't know, me signing away my car, you know. I have some property, but, you know, not much. And so that would be like a small portion was handed back to the Vatican. And all the rest remained under the settlement, the Norman settlement. It's called the Settlement of the Norman Conquest, and that's where the barons in France became kings in England. And in 1215, which is what, just 125 years or something like that later, It was the grandsons and great-grandsons of those Normans who forced the Magna Carta. See? It wasn't just a bunch of, the English like to call them barons because they were barons in France. That obscures the fact that they were kings in England. And that's how they were able to enforce the Magna Carta on King John. Because if King John had really been king, they wouldn't have been able to do that.
I just didn't read enough, did I?
And there's a gentleman back there.
Oh.
Barons became themselves.
Yeah. I can see that. He's going to come.
Fast forward, the Act of 1871.
Yeah.
I'm told that there is Vatican, Rome, one part of it, England, the second part, and the United States, the third part. And that's where, in 1871, the Act of 1871, England ended up with control of the United States.
There's a lot of confusion about the Act of 1871. The Act of 1871 was actually repealed in 1874, and then it was cut up and it was passed piecemeal in a series of different actions that culminated in 1878 when it actually went into effect. So, you know, it's probably better to characterize it as the Act of 1878, but basically what that did was it created a corporate government for the territorial government. And once they started acting as a corporation, they were no longer operating in any kind of sovereign capacity. So that is where it all flipped over into international jurisdiction of the sea.
I had somebody that text messaged me a question for you. Ask you this question. But before I ask you, I want to tell you there's a cup of water I brought up there for you in case you're thirsty.
Thank you.
Hi, Bruce. Could you please ask Anna a question for me? The Texas Constitution, Article 5, Section 15, states that every county court is a court of record common law. Are these courts of record functioning right now? Can we bring an action at law in these courts? Thanks, Miles.
Well, again, it goes back to your capacity, not the court's capacity. A court can be invoked in numerous different capacities. So if you are a person that, if you have claimed back your trade name and placed it on the land, and you come into court in that capacity, well then of course they can function as a court of record for you. And you can bring a common law action, although that court may not entertain it. So, you know, part of the process of reinstituting your county, after you've reclaimed your own status, you reinstitute your county and you start your own county court for the land jurisdiction. And then you always have common law available and there isn't any argument or question. So that's what we did in Alaska.
Okay, well, apparently Miles must be watching the live stream, okay? Thank you.
Sure enough.
I wanted to exceed my authority as the executive officer for Alamo and just make an observation to the group, since we've thought a lot about coming down here and what this opportunity meant to us in terms of just trying to do a lot of things that are trying to get done. Lots of people suffer with the same problem of not having a lot of resources. So you got to make choices and you got to prioritize and everything else. And I think Anna has answered you as best can be answered at this point, of some ideas of how what you're doing fits into a bigger picture and everything. And I think there's certainly very strong encouragement to work at a county level and anything you can do to strengthen and straighten out and make better those counties. But she's got the legal knowledge and a lot of other knowledge. But my side of it, when I look at it, is you also, in approaching the Texas Republic, you have to win converts. You have to win hearts and minds. This is about individual people. Why do I want you guys instead of those guys? And I mean, it really comes down to that in the end of the day. And the only reason I bring that up is because the answer to that question may be different in a lot of different states for a lot of different things are important. Texas is big enough that, there's a big enough population here. There may be parts of the state that are much more interested in something and others there and whatever. And you were talking earlier today about how to do both your business as, quote, a government and how to really draw people in. And I mean, that's the one thing I see that Anna gets lots of questions from people and individual people. And that question is really important to them. And so I think, like you talked earlier today about the tax thing, that's great. Because I mean, if there's anything everybody agrees we hate, it's tax. Okay? I mean, that one's, common enemy real easy. But what other things are there? And again, I would challenge you as a group to think sort of how you're marketing, how you're branding, all those silly kind of words. And again, you need the young people not just for technology. The technology is important. But you also need them because they know best how to appeal to their fellows out there, of their generation. And that's really ultimately what's going to deal this up or down, and is how well people really buy in. And by way of example, we talked briefly about banking, and I'm one of the major arguers for credit unions, because I believe they're sort of a very democratic approach. And frankly, in terms of personal use of bank, not business use of bank, but personal use of bank, I've never found one of the big banks that did right by me. And I have found that the credit unions are. And I think those are the kind of thinking you need to do as to how your message fits with that sort of personal appeal. Are you offering people something better? Because we're not going to change things because it's wrong. Okay? I'm sorry, I hate to break it to you, but we can sit here all day and figure out all the things that are wrong, and that's not a basis to change it, frankly, unless you know what to offer instead. And as I kind of look at it, we're going to end up in a situation where we're not going to have competing organizations, but we're going to have existing organizations that have to coexist with new organizations that are bringing new flavors in. And the only way you're going to do that is you got to be able to offer a better chocolate topping on the ice cream or sprinkles or something. You got to have something that really says, hey, yeah, this is kind of good having both these guys. Because you're not going to ever win a battle of me or they. Me and them is not going to work.
One of the things I see happening is that all of these groups that have an agenda similar to what we have, whether it's taxes or the federal government or the banking system, everybody needs to get together and promote everybody.
Yeah, and again, you can learn from each other. I mean, you have, I've said to several of you, you have tremendous advantages as the Texas Republic. Gee, Alaska can't say that. You have certain advantages. But hey, we got some advantages, We got probably a very modern recorder's office that, frankly, they'll record anything. Okay? And you can look it up online. And so, I can say to anybody, oh, yeah, that mortgage is on file up there. Just go online and look up Harold Hines and you'll see my mortgage. And as opposed to, I know many places have a very difficult chore for people as individuals to go in and just handle the recording process. And that public record is one of the important things that I thought government was supposed to offer. And you know, frankly, I haven't seen too many in Texas where there's very modern systems, for instance. And that might be something that is an avenue for you. That's all I'm suggesting. Yeah. Sorry, boss.
Well, I got another text message. So there are people watching live stream, okay? Good. Bruce, please let the lady know that she can get the last 3 years' taxes right now. And my understanding from talking to this gentleman is that if all of your earnings have been in the private sector, you're obviously not responsible for that income tax. And so, where any place in that when you file a amended 1040, file that amended 1040 showing a zero any place that you've got to show income because it all came from the private sector.
Right.
And you can turn those in for the last 3 years, you can get your money back immediately.
Yes, that's true, and you can go back 10 years without any big argument from the IRS if you care to get a little bit more involved in it. I knew that was true. Since I haven't paid any federal income taxes since 1998, it's not an area that I have really delved into. Just didn't have any personal reason to do so. But I was aware that yes, you can get the last 3 years if you've been employed, self-employed or employed privately, private sector. There's no reason why not. And that's a big clump of money for a lot of people. I mean, a lot of us are being asked to pay 30–40% of our income. So if you don't have to pay it, don't. One of the things I do need to bring up, I know some of you have children who are doctors and chiropractors, nurses. I want to draw your attention to something that's very insidious that was done back in the 30s. The Uniform Code Act and Title 37 makes all the doctors and dentists and nurses and other healthcare professionals who are licensed uniformed officers, just like police officers, just like military officers. Also, they took the press corps. Press corps is military. That's why when you hear all the same news being prattled and the same, buzzwords being repeated by all of the media, they've been under gag orders since the Second World War. And so that's why you wind up with this astonishing uniform pablum coming from the mainstream media. It's all been militarized. And so if you want free press, you're going to have to create a free populace. You're going to have to seize back your name and put it on the land jurisdiction. Because right now they have systematically gone through and mischaracterized virtually every American that's still alive today. And the only way to gain control of that military government is to gain control of your name and your estate. Now, what happens? You don't register to vote. You do not register to vote. In fact, if you have a voter's registration anywhere, rescind it. You're not a voter. You're an elector. You elect people to public office. You do not vote them into a corporate office. And if you do want to participate in their private election, remember that's a foreign government and a foreign entity. You don't want to trespass on them. That's like, you know, a German sailor trespassing on a French boat, right? All of their courts are defined as vessels dry docked on our shores. Their courthouses are vessels, and their judges are foreign. Now, can I walk into one of their courts and invoke my court? Yes, I can, because I know how to do that. Can I have my own separate court? I held court in the lobby of the IRS building in Anchorage, Alaska. I gave notice that the court was going to be there. We had our jurors, we had our witnesses, we had our bailiff, and we conducted court right there, sitting in the lobby of the IRS building. Do I have the right to do that? Certainly I do. People want to talk about this. You don't want to trespass against them, but you're not trespassing. If they're not paying the rent on it, who is? Here I am. Right? At the back of my book, the book called America Assembly Required, you'll see a little, it's not part of the book, it's just a little essay at the back of the book. It's called The Queen's Bench. And basically what I'm describing for people is that we do have the power. It's all vested in us. The ownership of everything is ours. The assets are ours. We just have to have sense enough to wake up and address the situation. Start handling our own business affairs. Start gathering together as you've done. Start operating your local and state governments. It's not like there's somebody evil standing there keeping us from doing what we should do. It's just that we haven't known that we needed to do it. And since I decided that I was queen, look at it this way. If you're the king, right, can you operate your own court? Sure. If you're the king, do you get to decide how your affairs are going to be administered? If you own the land, if it's yours to, pass on to the posterity coming after you, don't you get to administer it? Yes, you do. And you just have to come from the right standing, from the right position. Not as a territorial citizen, not as a municipal citizen, but as an American who is standing on the land of your birth, your state. Now I guarantee you it's a good feeling to be free. It is a wonderful feeling not to wake up in the middle of the night in the cold sweat worried about the IRS. And it felt really good after being bullied and having them coerce me under threat of kidnapping my son when he turned 21, and I was able to go in and sign all the paperwork, making sure that he was a free man. And I hope you not only free yourselves, I hope you free your whole family. I hope you get to your grandsons and your granddaughters and everybody and get the paperwork straight for them so that when they grow up, they're not going to have to go through this whole process.
How many people do you have following you?
About 100 million read my stuff every week. And that's worldwide. I don't know, how that cranks down demographically. I would think most of them are American.
What about forming a coalition of people like us, Republican, Texas, Anna, and some of the other groups that are out there working? Why can't we get everybody to support everybody else and put it on the website? I think that would go a long way towards helping us.
It probably would. We've got the Michigan General Jural Assembly, which I think is probably the only organization that's been operating longer than you have. They're trying to help everybody get their county jural assemblies set up. And they have a pretty wide outreach now. So
32 states.
32? Yeah. They'd be worth coordinating with and seeing what they're doing, because there's, like I said, there's this multiple layers of the land jurisdiction. It's not just, there's the soil and the land, and you need them both. Yes, sir.
I want to personally thank you for coming today. You have done a wonderful job. And
Thank you.
I really thank you. I'd like for everybody to give you a hand of applause.
Try not to be a big in the China shop here.
You got